All right, here we go. Back season 5 of the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. I am so humbled to be your host, National Business Development Manager for Gill Athletics, Mike Cunningham. As always, you can reach me because I live there still today, even on season 5. I still live on Twitter. So if you want to reach out to me, it's at Mike Cunningham over on Twitter. Now, let's get to today's episode. People get onto the podcast in a lot of different ways. This is one of the unique ways, I guess. I actually don't know today's guest at all. The first communication we've had is literally the 5 minutes before we hit record here, besides some emails to schedule the actual podcast here. I have just been following this guy on Twitter and Facebook for a while now and just thought, it sounded like a kind of a cool dude, to be real frank with you. He's got some, from social media, I know he's got some history in track, and I know he coaches and things like that, but we're going to learn more today. So help me welcome from, he's not even from anywhere. That's the crazy part. From Texas. We're going to learn more. Where? I didn't even ask where in Texas, but I know he's in Texas. Help me welcome the wise, the wonderful Mr. Danny McCray. Danny, how are you, sir?
I am doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Where are you in Texas? I never did ask.
I'm actually in Houston, Texas.
Okay. I was going to guess that, but as soon as I said Houston, though, you were like, no, I'm from Dallas, man, or whatever.
But I grew up in Killeen.
Is that right?
Killeen,
okay.
Texas. Shout out to Killeen, the home. And then we eventually moved and settled in Houston.
Well, it's partly by accident, but partly also not by accident that I'm representing my Texas. I got my TTFCA shirt on today, man. I love Texas coaches. I love TTFCA and THSCA. We do a lot with those organizations. So, any Texas coach is always welcome here on this podcast, my friend.
Yeah, thank you.
Danny, let's learn more about you. Okay. Let's start with, let's get back in our Wayback Machine here, and let's start with, where does track begin for you? Let's just start there.
Oh, wow. Track began for me in 8th grade. I remember being in junior high, trying track and field for the very first time, had no idea that I could run. I was actually a high jumper, just fiddling around in junior high track, didn't know anything, didn't know any better, just try to find an event to compete in. Then one day at the district track meet, having never ran before, someone went down on the infamous 4x4.
Yeah, I knew it.
And they needed a leg. And they were looking around for somebody. You hear all the jokes about it. They were looking around for somebody to run the 4x4. And the guy doing the high jump was like, hey, I'll do it. And then we go run the 4x4. And I remember getting the stick. I was on anchor leg, and I'm so old that was the day where they still used to have the gun lap for the 4x4. and so I remember getting the baton in second place, hearing the gun lap, but the pistol go off. I'm walking off the track. I'm in lane 8, and I'm hearing all these people yelling at me, and I don't know why anyone's yelling at me. And my junior high coach hops over the fence, and he's yelling at me, run, run, run. And so I turn around from lane 8 and I start running. And by this time, the anchor leg for the team ahead of me was probably about 120 meters around the track. And I caught him by about 250 and then finished. And literally it was at that very moment that myself and anyone else around me figured out, oh, we found a hidden talent and a hidden gem. Would have never known before that day. That was my introduction to track and field.
Now, how did that go down after the 401st meter? And what I mean by that is the 400 hurts. You weren't training. In fact, you might have been the one event that is like the least farthest away from training for the quarter mile. You're high jumping for 10 steps and jump. Here we are taking lots of steps, 400 meters. When you cross that finish line, elation because you won. That's cool. Elation because people were like, holy crap, where did that come from? That's a high jumper. Pain, the booty lock, the bear jumping on your back. What was it like after you got done with that leg?
Honestly, I never experienced any lactic acid in that race. And that was only because I was so scared. I mean, I literally was terrified because my junior high coach was yelling at me and everybody in the stands was just yelling at me. And so it was just that fear combined with adrenaline that by the time you get through with the race, you're ecstatic, you're elated, you don't even know what's going on. And it just so happened that at that time, the high school coaches were at the meet at the same time, like, oh, we can't wait for you to come up here next year. So you have all these things rushing through, and you don't even have time to feel tired. I didn't even feel tired at that point in time. And literally my life changed in that moment, because that's also when I met my first summer track coach, Billy Spiller Sr., who then introduced me to AAU track. And so that was my first time then actually sprinting. And it was that summer. And I tell you, it literally changed my life that day in that moment.
Were you a sprinter from now on? Like no more high jumping, or?
Yeah, no more high jumping. Let me first also go backwards. I was a terrible high jumper. So this was just more or less, let's find a body. Hey, can he clear one height, and we'll go ahead and we'll put him in the meet. So I was a terrible high jumper. And then it was in the summertime when Coach Spiller had me running for the CT Cruisers. Shout out to the CT Cruisers. That's when I got the opportunity to run the 1, the 2, and the 4. And that summer, they were having the AAU Junior Olympics in Kansas. And I had qualified 1, 2, and 4, and then went to the meet, and then found out at the JOs I wasn't able to run. The reason why I wasn't able to run is I was in the wrong age division. I was 14, but I was running in the 15, 16 age division. And when you can't run up in age. So when I got to the meet, I literally had to go to my first AAU Junior Olympics and just sit and watch it.
You is that still true today? You can't run up?
You cannot run up.
It makes complete sense that you can't run down. I don't know that I understand at all that it doesn't make sense to run up.
Yep. Because you have to qualify in your age division. And so when they have the qualifying rounds that start district and then regionals and then JOs, I had missed the district and regionals for the 14-year-olds. So they couldn't move me down to my age group, even though I made it in the 15, 16-year-old age division.
You know, in that age group, that's a pretty precocious age, right? And there's a lot of things that feel very completely unfair. And you know, you think about when you're that age, think about when I was that age, and there's things that just, you know, it's life. And, you know, what you're describing there is just life. Mistakes happen and we move on. But as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, it feels like the end of the world. Did that just devastate you? I mean, I can't imagine going to a track meet and just watching when I'm supposed to be competing.
It was very hard, but I was so new, I really didn't know any better, right? I still remember taking a picture with Roger Kingdom. And I remember, you know, taking a picture with these great athletes that I was just happy to be there at that point. So even though it didn't work out that summer, I was like, oh, okay, you know what? We'll try it again next year. And this started, middle school track season might end in March. And then now we're doing summer track in June. So it was just a very short time period. I didn't even know what I was missing because I hadn't been competing that long.
So you said a very strong statement that race, that 4x4, changed your life.
It did.
Tell me more about that as it relates to the high school side of it now.
So I ran that race. And again, I had no idea that I could run because I didn't start playing organized sports until 8th grade. So I was that typical kid that didn't have all of the youth sports, private trainers, you know, AAU basketball. I was that kid just played around the neighborhood. And that we had the first opportunity to play organized sports was middle school. In 7th grade, I got in some trouble. So I didn't even get a chance to participate 7th grade athletics. So then 8th grade for me was just wide open, first new experiences. So then that race allowed me to then realize, oh, okay, I can run. Well, the thing that's different about why summer track is so important, it's because it gave me the opportunity to realize what existed beyond my neighborhood. I only knew running up and down the street. It wasn't until now you start competing against kids across the country that you're like, oh, I'm pretty fast. I didn't know I was this fast. And then that then opens the door when you go to high school, a lot greater confidence. Now, you know, you go into the school year and you decide I'm running track now. And at that point in time, I was a 100 and 200 meter sprinter, wasn't even a quarter miler. And, you know, I was constantly winning races, performing well. And then my freshman year of high school, there were 2 seniors that missed the bus on a varsity track meet that they had pulled me up from the freshman team to the varsity team just to go to run a 4x2. And I remember being on the bus that day, and the coach said, I'm looking for some people to run the quarter at this meet. And unbeknownst to me, the coach was behind me. And I remember saying to my friends, I am not running a 400. And he was standing behind me, and Coach Malone says, hey, I have found the person that's going to run the 400 at this meet.
There's a lesson there. Keep your mouth shut.
Yes. Yes. Keep your mouth shut. If I would have just toiled in obscurity and just hid amongst the other people, I would have not been in that moment that day. But I also would not have the opportunity to go run. And literally the first time I'd ever run a quarter, I was, again, 14, freshman, varsity team. First time I learned to run a open 400. First time I ever ran it, 49.9 was my first time. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And I didn't even realize that was pretty good at that time.
Sure.
I was just at the track meet running a quarter. I don't know if there's an old rapper named Flavor Flav.
What? You say that like we don't know who that is. Come on, man.
Listen, I don't know who could be listening. I don't want to age myself too much, but they're, growing up.
Well, first of all, you said he was an old rapper, which I'm like, that's what I grew up on. So you automatically age yourself and me, by the way. And by the way, hold on. So in the magic world of podcasting, you're actually listening to this in 2024, but we're actually recording this in 2023. Did you see, because you brought him up, so I have to talk about it now. Did you see where he sang the national anthem?
Oh, it was terrible.
No.
It was terrible. Listen, you know what? No, take that back. Let me take that back. Hey, considering that he is not a singer, let me look it through a different lens.
Exactly.
He actually carried.
It was not bad.
Yeah.
I thought it was. I only pressed play. Well, two reasons, because it's Flavor Flav, but also I was like, oh, this is going to be a train wreck. Like this, come on.
Yeah,
Flavor
I thought
Flav
so too.
Singing the national anthem, terrible. And it's like, oh man, he didn't flub any words. He stayed on time. Yeah. Now, the only disappointment I had was he did not end the song with his Flavor Flav. Like there was nothing. Yeah. He just ended it like he was supposed to. And I was like, well, that's a little disappointing, Flavor Flav. I wish you'd have given a little bit of flavor for that at the end. But yeah. Okay. All right. You brought him up, so I had to. Yeah, I was very proud of him that he did not.
Yes, you're right. You're right. That's why I had to retract my statement.
Yes.
I had to retract it. All right.
All right. Now give us your actual Flavor Flav story.
Okay. Sorry. So if you know him and you watched him perform, you know how he with his hands all tight. That is literally what I look like the last 100 meters of my 400 a day. Absolutely no arm movement. They were locked in the chest. You asked me earlier about lactic acid. Well, I felt it there for the very first time. That's when I realized what the quarter was really about.
What that feels like.
Yes, that's what that feels like. All right. And then that literally changed my life, because at that point in time, that's when the coach decided to leave me on varsity as a freshman. Say, hey, we're gonna stay here for the whole season. And I remember at the time I had also picked up the long jump. But when I ran 49 in the quarter, I remember the next week at practice, the varsity coach walks out to the jumps coach and walks over and says, hey, McCray will never long jump again. Hey, let's get him out the pit. We're going over to the track.
Do you so kind of interjecting a current Danny McCray into the past Danny McCray, because now one of the things that we have today that we didn't have that day right there, the next day at practice, and they're like, hey, Danny, you ain't never long jumping again, you're a quarter miler sprinter, right? But today we have perspective. We have that hindsight's 2020. And we're going to learn more about your coaching, your athletic and your coaching experience. But I'm just curious about that. Do you think that was a mistake? And I'm not saying, how your career went out, so it's easy to say no, because I did X and Y and Z. I'm talking about when we find a kid that has that hidden talent. We didn't know they could be a hurdler. We didn't know they could be a long jumper. We didn't know they could be a sprinter. And so we automatically say, hey, stop developing them in the long jump. Just stay over there. Do you agree with that? Do you think they should have kept you training as a long jumper as well? I'm just curious about that.
So it's hard for me to look back at that day and say that he was wrong, because I understood why he did it. Mm-hmm. Probably about a week before that happened, one of the best long jumpers on our team blew his knee out at practice going into the pit. So I know that my coach at that time had a heightened sense of awareness when it came to that injury. He was definitely concerned. he was gun shy because of what happened to Pete the week before. So then he walked to me, and I understood at the time, but again, I was 15.
Now,
So
I'm the host, so I get to ask these crazy questions. And I
okay.
caveat this with there is no bigger fan of track coaches. So even that your coach back then, I love him to death for what he does and what he did. The impact he made on young people is immensely important. But what you just described there was I'm going to say it in very layman, very not so PC terms. He didn't care about you in the long jump getting hurt until you ran 49 point. Then he was very concerned.
Yeah, okay. Didn't think about it. You're right. Good perspective. Yes. Good. Yes.
I know that wasn't his. I know he did not say, hey, on Thursday, I didn't really care about Danny, but then he ran fast on Friday. So Monday, I really care about Danny. I know that's not the perspective. I'm just always curious about when we, especially at a young age here as a freshman, that's still extremely young, that we take them away from multi-events when I think multi-events is very good for your development. That's where I say, and I'm not saying mistake in regards like coach was wrong. I'm just saying like now if you look back, it's like, oh, maybe you'd been even more athletic or more athletic quicker if you'd have kept doing long jump and type activities. Anyway, I digress. Yes. I digress. So you're a sprinter now, though.
Yep, sprinter now until that day, and that's when I became pretty much a quarter miler.
So now you're a quarter miler. Okay.
Yep, and I was a quarter miler. And, back in those days, I don't think high school coaches understood the value of off events, right? How the 2 and the 1 go to the 4, right? It was just, you ran 2 relays and your main individual event. That was your schedule for the week, every single week.
Right.
And it wasn't until the summertime that I had the opportunity to run the 1 and run the 2. So I went back to the 1, 2, and the 4 in the summertime, and then occasionally run a relay depending on what meet we were at.
Did you run your whole high school career running high school track and also then doing summer track?
Yes. Yep.
How did that go? Because we're going to get into that probably fairly throughout today's podcast, I think, because I know Danny has a very nuanced understanding and way he activates his summer coaching. And I'm very intimately involved with high school coaches. And so I'd like to have that discussion because it seems to be a discussion that comes up every year and there is a lot of fighting, for lack of a better term. So did you run your all 4 years doing both?
All 4 years. All 4 years.
How did that go? Not how did it go, like, were you successful? How did it go? Like, do you remember communication between high school coach and summer coach, conflicts, or nope, they worked in together, or you know what? It actually was 2 totally different things. They didn't talk to each other, not because they were anti each other. It was like, oh no, I ran in high school until May 15th or whatever. And then I went summer. How did that experience go through high school?
More of the latter, right? It literally was just that. Now there's no more summer track. It's club track. But when I came through, it was strictly summer track. I played football in the fall. I ran high school track in the spring. After the very last meet of high school track, high school season was over. High school coach went on his way. And then we eventually went to our summer track coach. And we didn't really have meets outside of June, July, August. And then by the time you finished the Junior Olympics in August, it was time to go to 2-a-days back in football. So there was always a very clear distinction between what went on in high school and what went on outside.
And I'm a huge proponent of communication. And I believe those 2 entities should be communicating together throughout the year as appropriate. But now I'm kind of wondering, hearing you describe that, and I know it's different today, and let's not necessarily talk about today, but because we'll get to today, right? But in that scenario, I think, well, what was wrong with that? That was pretty clear. Hey, we're in track and field season. Not saying this meanly, but don't talk to me. I'm a high school coach, high school teacher. Let me coach my kids. And then as soon as state meet or regional or whatever, however far you make it. All right. If you, Danny, want to go run summer track, great. I'm not going to speak into it. Whatever that you and your parents choose that coach. So have at it. What's wrong with that?
So at the time, obviously nothing. I think it worked out well for me.
Okay.
But in that time period, there was a lot less information that was available. The overall skill of the athlete wasn't as high as it is today. And so that came as a result of more time, right? So then as you had more time, more knowledge, more skill base, one of the things I always appreciated about my high school coach, it's by the time my freshman year had ended, I ran 47-10 in the quarter of that year.
Dude.
And I remember my high school coach saying, "Hey, I don't know what to do with you." He
Oh,
said,
hey, hold on. That's huge.
"Hmm?
I don't know is like a superpower, man. Like,
Yep,
you know how much trust you garner when you tell someone I don't
yep,
know instead of BSing?
yep,
That's bravo to that coach. Hey, man,
yep." Hey,
man, I didn't know I could
Coach
make it to
Bill Farley.
47. Yeah.
Coach Bill Farley was the man. He meant a lot to me. All right. He was my calculus teacher.
Mhm.
And at the same time, he was also my track coach. And he could say, I remember him saying, "I don't know what to do with you. So the best thing that I know to do is to try to connect you with people who know what to do with you." And I remember him talking to my dad. And that was the first time I got the opportunity to go to a track and field summer camp at the University of Houston. And that's when I first met Coach Telez. That's
Yeah.
when I first met, at the time, Carl Lewis and Leroy Burrell when they were still competing.
Yeah.
And I got a chance to go down there and learn from them and then learn different drills to do. At that time, I'd always kept having hamstring problems. Now, all of a sudden, Coach Telez is showing me different things to do to strengthen my hamstring. All right. We are able to take this information back to my high school coach. My high school coach was also the offensive line coach on the football team. Right. But he was a West Point grad, super smart. And he just tried to work to figure things
Hmm.
out. Right. And so he was the second sprint coach. I can't forget about Coach Malone, rest in peace. Coach Malone did a really good job with me my ninth grade year, um, kind of shepherding me. And, we learned through some things together. There were some things I wish I would have changed about my freshman year, looking back in hindsight. But I believe that at the time, he was the right person for me to make that transition from eighth to ninth grade. Then he eventually chose to take a different job at a different school. And then Coach Farley came in. And then with Coach Farley, I think that was just the perfect blend moving forward for me. And I really thank him to this day for being the kind of man that would simply say, "I don't know, so let me go ahead and try to figure some things out." Okay, I got clicked off for a second, so
Yep,
sorry.
keep going. We're you were talking about that McFarland was the man. It doesn't surprise
Yep,
you now that he was the man that would say that. Keep going.
yep. So Coach Farley, I just love and appreciate to this day. I think about that when I'm with athletes to this day, and I'm like, "Hey, there's some things I don't know. There's some things I need outside counsel." Because if you, especially the more talented the athlete have, the more gifts that they have, sometimes you're not ready for those gifted athletes. And you don't want to simply ride on what God gave them. You want to help them to maximize what God gave them. And you may not be equipped with all the tools. You can go to every coaching seminar. You can get level 1, level 2 certified, IFF certified, but you can still lean back on some different people to kind of help. And I think this part of why I am this way is because I actually saw someone do that with me
Yeah.
when I was 15, 16 years old.
I like if you're listening, you've got to go back and listen to that story. I mean, that truly is an amazing example of a coach who's doing amazing. I mean, he gets a freshman running 47. Come on, we would all take that every day, twice on Sunday, and yet has the leadership, the confidence, the lack of ego to say, "Oh
Mhm.
man, I don't know what to do now. So let's go find some help." Or you go to the camp. I mean, what a lucky break, honestly. You go and there's Tom and
Yes.
Carl and Leroy. Come on, I mean,
Yes.
literally, it's a little bit like, wow, you kind of lucked out there, buddy.
Yes.
And then you bring back stuff, and coach is like, "Oh, okay, we can start incorporating some of that. Oh, I see where that like that's bravo, man.
Yep.
That is more of what we need in teachers, coaches, ourselves, athletes. That is what an amazing example. I love that. So how did high school go? And as you start getting into senior year, what's the plan? Are you going to college? Do you want to
Mhm.
be a businessman? Do you want to be a coach? Do you want to go to the University of Houston? Tell me about that process.
So I think going into my sophomore year, things changed.
Hmm.
And I ended up winning state as a sophomore in the 400.
Wow.
Then we went to JOs after my sophomore year. And then I won national championship in the 1, the 2, and the 4 in the same meet. And life started to change. Then won state again my junior year. Then came back my senior year, and then was U.S. #1 that year as well, and made the U.S. team, the U.S. junior team rather. But all that whole time, I was a football player.
Yeah, I was
And
going to ask,
football
where's
was,
football in this? Yeah,
yep,
yeah.
football was my primary sport. And I ended up, that's why I received my scholarship to Texas A&M, was in football.
Is that
Uh,
right?
yep,
Wow.
yep.
I had no
So
clue. See, this is what I love about taking people who I have no clue about them. It's like, I had no idea you played football and you got a scholarship at Texas A&M.
yeah.
That's crazy. That's awesome.
So
Well,
that's kind of took me there.
why Texas A&M? There's a lot of in Texas, and I don't know if it's because you are such a big state. There's a lot of grouped them, specifically not only professional sports but in your
Mhm.
colleges. Houston has, the people are Houston Cougars people, and there are A&M people. Our boss, our CEO, went to Baylor. He's from Illinois, but he went to Baylor, and there's a Baylor group. They're a little bit smaller, but there's
Right.
a
Yep.
Baylor group, and obviously
Mhm.
Texas and Texas Tech. I mean, it's very culturally different. Texas Tech people are different than A&M people, etc.
Right.
Why A&M? You grew up in Houston.
No, I grew up in Killeen. And so
Oh,
Killeen
that's right. That's right.
it's probably about 30 to 45 minutes one direction to go to Austin, 30 to 45 minutes the other direction to go to Waco. And so growing up, there was a quarter mile by the name of Willie Caldwell that ultimately ran at Baylor, but he graduated from my high school.
Hmm.
And so with Baylor being so close to Killeen and Baylor being the king of quarter milers at the time, there was that natural attraction toward Baylor. And many people thought might end up at Baylor. UT always had a good track program, always had a good football program. They were right down the street. I had the opportunity to go visit UCLA, and UCLA was probably one of my dream schools until I realized that way at that time, there were no Pac-12 networks. So we only had regional things being played on TV. And so my parents, amazing parents, and I tell the story to this day, why I love them so much and why I try to do the things for my son. I didn't even know my parents actually had vacation because they literally went with me everywhere I went. If there was a football game, they were there. If there was a track meet, they were there. It didn't matter. It wasn't until I got older that I realized they were actually using all of their annual vacation to basically follow me around to all my sporting events, to be that parent, the set of parents for all of my friends whose parents couldn't come to these meets.
I was about to say that's really special, and it's actually unfortunately unique. Did you realize that in the time? Did you see, your buddy Joe and his parents are never there, and
Didn't even
teammate
realize it.
Timmy, not even, and you're like, man, my parents are. It actually might have been, again, we're talking about teenager kids, so teenager Danny. It might have been at some point. It's like, oh man, my parents are here again. Like, can I just,
No, that was actually opposite. I love my parents being there.
oh, that's so
I
cool.
always so my dad was, and I think I get this habit from him too. No matter what stadium it was, my dad would always sit in the same spot, no matter what stadium it was. So no matter where I was playing football or I was running track, I kind of knew if I couldn't
Knew where
see
he
him,
was, right?
I kind of knew the general vicinity, the area in which he was.
That's
Right.
cool, man. I love
And they
that.
were there. And they, my parents, at the time, my dad had a van. So all of my friends were coming. They would ride with us with our van. They'd be the parents that would go back out and get everybody food, and we all eat together. It just became, it was so normal.
Yeah.
I just expected it.
What
Right.
what mom and dad do?
So my dad was a command sergeant major in the United States Army.
Oh, yes, sir.
And my mother at the time was working as a civilian contractor for the military. So she worked on the Fort Hood military base.
So you didn't, there was no getting away with stuff for,
No,
yeah.
no. It's especially I remember when I was real young, like being in like when we lived in Maryland, and even Germany, when my dad was a drill sergeant at the time. And it's just like the movies. Sometimes waking up to the flashing lights in the room, on your feet, on your feet, on your feet, no dragging slowly out of bed. You had to get up. I remember,
Get moving.
having chores that needed to be done before my dad came home for lunch, and wondering, okay, why do I have to cut the lawn at 7 in the morning if I'm home all day? why can't I just mow the lawn when I feel like mowing the lawn? And it was, nope, we're going to be done this at this time, this day, before I get home. You will not lie around in the bed all day and watch TV and cartoons. You're going to work. So yeah, it definitely, you learned a lot. I learned so much from him, and he certainly instilled a mindset in me because of the discipline the military provided.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say, to be a good football player, good enough to go to an A&M and to be the track athlete that you were, discipline is one of the words I always think of. I mean, it's very few people who have the natural talent to do that. You have to have the natural talent and the discipline. It's when you have the trifecta. You have those two plus the actual attitude. Like, I love to run the quarter, or I love to be a running back or whatnot, that you get the real special, Barry Sanders type of people and things like that.
Right.
You learned a lot of discipline from mom and dad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was, I remember when no pass, no play was first introduced in Texas. And I remember my dad saying, no pass, no play in the McCray household is 79. Anything under 80, you don't play. And I don't care what a coach says. I don't care about anybody asking me. If you come home with anything less than an 80, you won't play.
Man, shout out to dad. Whew.
Yeah.
And mom. I know mom's there too,
Yes.
man. Holy cow, that's amazing. So so you're going to go to A&M. You go to A&M. What was the academic side, the professional side? Was it I'm going to be a business owner, I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be an NFL player? What was the thought as far as like a career as you went into A&M?
So leaving high school, I had two things written in my senior book. I thought I was going to be a professional athlete, or I thought I was going to, actually three things: professional athlete, lawyer / sales. That was kind of my route leaving high school. And it ended up being that way. I ended up having the opportunity to become a professional athlete, and then retiring from pro sports, and then went into a sales and marketing career. So it kind of matched up.
What'd you get your degree in?
Marketing and sociology.
So you said you became a professional athlete. It's fun that I get to not know what sport it was, actually in football or track.
Track and field.
Is that
Track
right?
and field. Yep.
So talk to us about time at A&M. This is pre Pat Henry. I know we all think of Pat Henry now. Pat was kicking butt in at Blinn Junior College and LSU at the time. Yeah, exactly. So who was the coach there? There was a famous coach there. It has to be I can't think of their name.
My coach was Coach Ted Nelson.
Yes, Ted Nelson. Yes.
Yep.
So what was it like? We think we know what it's like to be at A&M today. What was it like actually being there when you were? What years are we there at A&M?
So I was there from 92 to 97. I had one redshirt year to an injury, but 92 to 97.
All right. So how was it there during that time?
It was fantastic. I think my time in college was second to none. And the friendships forged over time, just the relationships, the experiences. I think it was a perfect blend of being independent and dependent, right? It was just a great time period for me. And I think A&M was everything that I hoped it would be when I left high school. It was better because of the people that were around. And then Coach Nelson, he was a former quarter miler himself that ran at A&M, that eventually took over the team that he ran for. And that whole sense of community, being a part of the team that was on the rise, because at that point in time, Baylor had the quarter milers. We had the opportunity to build quarter milers, to build a name. I think we did a lot of things. Even the other day when I went to go look at the new updated A&M top 12 record boards, it was really cool to see so many athletes from my era, which in and of itself is so impressive, because what Coach Henry has done there has been next level.
Right.
So the amount of talent that he's brought in there since he walked through those doors, for anybody prior to his regime coming in to still be reflected on those boards, only kind of reaffirmed the type of talent that we had at the school at that moment.
That's a good point. Did you play football all 4 years?
So I played 3. So the only year I didn't play was my last year.
Still a lot. So how did you seem to be fairly resilient. In high school, you've got a high school coach and coaching staff for football. You have your sprint coach during high school season, you go to a different sprint coach. So there's some pliability of like, okay, I can roll with the punches. This coach does things not only technically different, like how they actually coach, but personality probably a little bit different. Now you go into collegiate sports, you've got a new and more time intensive football coach in process. And then you have a Ted Nelson, who I assume is maybe does things a little bit differently on the X's and O side, but also personality is a little bit different. That's a sticky wicket to kind of navigate, right? And then we aren't even talking about, you have professors and personal life. I mean, there's a lot of different ways and things coming at you. How did you navigate, full-time, big-time college football and full-time, big-time college track?
It was tough, but not unmanageable, because that's what I'd always done. Obviously the biggest challenge going to college and then being on a football scholarship is recognizing that football comes first. It pays the bills. It's why I'm there. I remember after my senior year of high school, the summer before going to become a freshman, making the U20 team. And at the time they called it US Juniors. So the U20 team, and the ironic part is that was the team that Coach Henry was actually the coach of.
That's funny.
And we had the TAC US championships, and the top 4 places were all Texas kids. One was Texas was a freshman at Baylor, and then he became for Texas, but the other 3 behind them were all 3 Texas athletes. So we were all excited about going to represent the U.S. and having a 4x4 made up of all Texas athletes. So shout out to Deion Miner, shout out to Chris Jones, and shout out to Milton Mallard, because that was supposed to be the team, and we all wanted to be on that team together. Well, that particular year, Stanford was playing A&M in a preseason classic. So we were starting football earlier than we would normally have started football. And because I was a freshman, freshmen come in before the rest of varsity comes back. So I was not able to go to World Juniors that year because we had started football. And so then that was just another brief introduction to this is college life. And so then there was all this expectation, at least the first year, that the first spring I would participate in spring football. So now you're off and you're moving to track season. You get there late for indoor because we played in a bowl game my freshman year. So you end the season January 1st, football season end of January 1st. But then track season is starting January 15th. So there's no training, no background. I remember that most kids have a probably like a month break between the first semester and second semester. Well, the first half of that was gone for me because we were doing bowl preparation. The second half was gone for me because we were now getting ready for the track season. So I would literally just basically end one and come to the next.
And were you still supposed to be a quarter miler?
I was still supposed to be a quarter miler.
Because, having the last day of, let's call practice bowl game, January 1 or whatever. And then, maybe there's a meet on the 9th that weekend for a 60-meter guy. And I know it's different. There's, you got to get your track legs under you, but way easier to run a 60 than a quarter. Like that seems, I mean, you got to train to be a quarter mile. Not that you don't have to train to be a 60-meter guy, but I'm just saying like that seems hard, like impossible, maybe even.
And it was compounded by the fact that when I came through high school, the whole idea of a high school athlete running indoor track in high school wasn't even heard of. So my first experience running indoor was my freshman year. And this was before Mondo tracks and rubber surfaces. We were running on 170-meter wood tracks. That was my first experience to indoor track. And the first thing to think about trying to run a quarter, and I'm looking at the track and saying to myself, all right, now how many times around is this before we get to 400 meters?
Yeah. Where do I start? Where do I stop?
And I'm like, is this what I'm supposed to run on? I'm getting splinters in my fingers just putting my hands on the track. It was very different. And it was a challenge. And again, adjustment to shout out to Coach Nelson for being able to be flexible enough with the adjustment when I first started to let me run at that time the 55 meters. Let me run the 55 meters indoors and then hop on some 4x4s so I could start to get acclimated to running a quarter again via the 4x4 relay.
Right.
And that's how we made it. That's how we made it happen.
Go back to that U20 team. Do you remember where U20 championships were supposed to be?
I do not. I wish I did. I don't know.
Somewhere
Should have been
overseas, I assume.
1992. Sorry?
Somewhere overseas, I assume.
Yes, yes.
Would this have been
Yeah.
your first overseas trip? How did that make you?
No, well, first, that would have been my first overseas trip to compete.
Yeah,
But
right.
but my dad was in the Army, so we lived in Germany for 6 years
That's right.
too.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe that plays into it, because I'm thinking of this, you know, I hate to call Killeen a small town Texas kid, but, you know, a small town Texas kid here who, you know, doesn't have a lot of opportunities to go to overseas and go to maybe Bolivia or Chile or wherever that might have been. And I know you can't go because it's football, and you certainly love football. You're at A&M to play football, so I get that. But I had to think there were maybe some conflicted emotions there about, like, man,
Absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely. Man, I wanted to be there so bad because at the U20 trials, that was my first time running sub 46. And
Mm.
so I ran 45.74 my senior year of high school. And so there's that natural sense that says, one more meet. Where could I be in another meet? And then the concept of knowing that, again, the four guys that were going to be on the 4x4, three of us were literally class of 92.
Mm.
So we had competed against each other. And now we have the opportunity to go put on the red, white, and blue together. Right. There were many conflicting emotions at that point in time that I wish that, and I'd seen sometimes other programs, at least in the future, where they made some concessions and they would let the athlete, hey, we're okay, go take advantage of this opportunity and then come back and rejoin us. But I just came through, and I came through in an era where that wasn't the norm.
I'm always interested, you know, there's amazing athletes out there. You were obviously one of them during this time frame. And, you know, they say for professional track, the easiest way to go from number 1 to number 100 is to turn pro. That same sentiment is in high school track. The easiest way to go from the number 1 quarter miler in the country in high school is go run in college. It's very
Yep.
few, you know, and you mentioned, you know, the level of talented of high school or of collegiate athletes, specifically all athletes, but college is it's just crazy. I mean, it's really ridiculous what goes on at NCAA on all levels, by the way. I mean, you get D3 kids running 10-0. I mean, so
Yes.
don't get at me at this
Yes.
D1, D2 stuff.
Yes.
All of the levels are just crazy. I blame the coaches, by the way, whenever they complain about, like, man, it takes, you know, 10 flat. And I'm like, well, it's your fault. You're coaching them too good. I mean, what do you know, if you want to make an 11 flat, coach worse, I guess. I don't know.
That's right.
But
That's
but
right.
so I'm wondering, you know, and I'm doing a little bit of assumption here that when you went into college at A&M for track, that you weren't winning every race like you might have done in high school. You were getting your butt handed to you, because I'm just assuming there were other great kids that, you know, were juniors and seniors, weren't coming off football, etc. How did you handle going from being the man, the guy who's winning everything at your high school level, winning state titles in Texas, for crying out loud, going to U20s, making Team USAs, things like that, to, again, I'm assuming here a little bit, like, you know, you go to your first, well, you weren't Big 12. Were you Big 12?
Southwest Conference.
That's right. I knew it. So your Southwest Conference, which was amazing, by the way. It was basically the precursor to the SEC.
Yep.
You go to the conference meet and you get 7th or 8th, maybe. I don't know. You correct me, but it's like, how did your ego handle that?
You know, it was definitely different. The ego was fine. The competitive drive always wanted more. And I recognized what I was missing. You know, it's when you start to get off to a good start and then you got to leave to go back to spring football. And spring football is long.
Mhm.
It's you know, it's a easy month. And by the time you do that and you come out of spring football, after all that contact and time away from track, it literally was right before the Southwest Conference meet when I came back
Mhm.
out to the track again. And before spring football had started, at the time, there was like a NCAA qualifying list where if you hit a certain time, that's how you qualified versus the
Mhm.
process now of going through regionals.
Yeah,
You hit a time.
descending order list, just like we do
Yep.
indoor still. Mhm.
Yep. You had an automatic. If you had an automatic time, you were there,
Right.
and then they would just fill in around the people that didn't make the automatic time based
Mhm.
on how many spots they
Yeah,
needed to
provisionals.
fill.
Yep. Mhm.
So I had already hit the automatic spot in the 200, already hit the automatic qualifier in the 400. And then we had a really good 4x4 at the time. And at that point, I split 43.9 my freshman year. And this is before going back to spring football. And then going back to spring football, now all of a sudden, it's rough. You're going through a month contact, all the above, because you got to earn your spot, come back out to the track. Conference meet wasn't good. And then eventually I got hurt. So then going into my freshman year, there were NCAAs in New Orleans, and I'm watching the NCAA meet because I had pulled my hamstring. And so I had to sit out that year. And I think that actually motivated me moving forward. And then also, as I got a little older, there were some concessions made by Coach Slocum on the football team that now when it came to spring, then by the next time, all I had to do was go to meetings instead of meetings and practice. All right. So they kind of keep my body fresh, keep my training progressing.
You mentioned Slocum. Did you have Jackie Sherrill on staff there?
No. So Jackie was gone.
Okay.
So it was just Coach Slocum at that point.
I met Jackie when I coached at Mississippi State. That's how I know Jackie Sherrill. Now he's
nice guy.
Yeah. There's some stories, let me tell you.
Oh, I can only imagine.
He was a master motivator.
Yeah, I used to hear about the Jackie Sherrill days.
Oh, yeah.
Older players before I got there.
So, and maybe you answered this because you talked about you played football for 3 years and finished out with track and field. Did you ever feel like, hearing that story about, going through spring ball and you're right, not only is it the contact and the beating up of actual football practice, but it's the time away from actual track practice. It's a double dose of badness, especially for a quarter miler.
Right.
Did you ever feel like, and we haven't talked much about your football prowess, but did you ever feel like one sport was holding you back over the other? Like, man, if I just did football, I could make the draft. Or, man, if I just did track, I could make the Olympics. Did you ever feel like kind of an internal struggle?
So the opposite. I probably should have felt the internal struggle. I think what happened was I had done it for so long, it became a way of life. That's the only thing that I knew. And I was afraid to not do one or the other. I needed to do them both. When in reality, by the time my junior year came, that's when I remember going to the Olympic trials in '96 and then walking away and saying, man, I wonder how much further I could go if I actually had a fall to train, if I didn't have anything pulling me away. How much further could I go in track? And lo and behold, that's what then ultimately allowed me to come to peace with the decision to not play football my last year, and then say, because at this point in time, like, I'm good, but I'm not NFL good. So I believe that I can be world championship, Olympic level good in track, and I have opportunities there. Let's explore those.
What a tug of war of I'm going to say ego, because I don't believe ego is necessarily bad. I think bad ego is bad.
Okay.
So you show humility of like, yeah, I'm good, but I'm not NFL good. Like let's be realistic here. I could maybe make a practice squad or, maybe hang around, but I'm not draft. I'm not top 3 round draft. So to have that humility, but then you have to have the ego, and this is good ego of like, yeah, but I think I can make the Olympics maybe. Like if I just do full time, like that's a heck of an internal struggle, tug of war there, of like being able to have extreme humility on one sport and then extreme positive confidence on another.
Right. It's I never thought about it that way. That's a great perspective. It's just, for me, I think it was just fueled by competitiveness. I hated walking off the track in Atlanta in '96 and then saying to myself, I can do better. All right. I can do more. I didn't really understand really good practice efforts. Back when I ran, there wasn't an overemphasis across the board on mechanics. There wasn't as much emphasis on race strategy. All right. It was, let me train you as efficiently and effectively as I possibly can. Gun goes off, let's go get it. And I wanted to see what it would be like if I actually could dedicate more time to learning and understanding the craft of track.
So where did you go? Where does someone who's under Ted Nelson's tutelage is going to make a stab at the next round? And there's no draft for track, so it's like, okay, I'm pro. Here we go. Let's try to make some money somewhere. Where does one go for training? What do you do?
So, and it's interesting you say that, because it kind of goes back to, sometimes a story can go full circle. as I said earlier, UCLA was one of my dream schools. And I almost went to school there had it not been so far away from home. And at the time, John Smith was the coach at UCLA and had the relationship with John through high school. And then John and Emmanuel Hudson had recently formed their own management group called HSI. And then John reached out, then Emmanuel reached out. We had the connection, and then that was, all right, I know where I'm going to go next. And
You
so
were in
leaving college,
HSI.
yes, I was an HSI.
So I'm just a tad bit younger than you. You graduated in 92, I think, right? High school.
Yes.
I graduated in 94. So we're
Okay.
one and the same. And I remember during my high school, so 90 to 94, I was a track geek, and I remember HSI was the thing, man. Like that's like we wanted to all be HSI because it was the only like group. Like we knew about Santa Monica Track Club, of course.
Yep.
That definitely was a thing too. But HSI brought swagger to it, with Maurice and all them. I mean, that was just the place to be. You were at HSI. How so I got to visit in 2000 a training session down there. So Otto and Maurice and John and Larry and and it was just so that like I mean I'm just in awe of these individuals, and they're cracking up making jokes, and I was like, man, this has got to be like the greatest life in the world. Like they run a little bit, then they come to the side and chill and tell jokes, and I was like, this is amazing. How was that time during HSI? You're going to tell me the exact opposite. You're like, oh yeah, no, Mike, all that was a facade. It was terrible.
No. Listen, I think overall, there are always ups and downs,
Sure,
right?
of course.
But overall, it was a great experience for me. It taught me a
Awesome.
lot about life, got me prepared for life. I still remember probably one of my first experiences when I got there, getting to practice. And at the time, my two training partners were Antoine Maybank and Quincy Watts.
Wow.
And so I remember getting there, and and Antoine and I are still cool to this day. And I laugh at this story. So Maybank says to me as he's shaking my hand, last one in, first one to go. And that's and so he's
Welcome to the
laughing.
pros.
Yeah, welcome to the pros. Now he's laughing, he's being welcoming, but I could tell there's still some seriousness even amongst the jest.
Right.
And as I look around, because I got there like a year after Maurice. So I'm out here looking at Antoine. I'm out here looking at Quincy, Otto, John Drummond, Maurice, Marie Jose Perec. Right. It was just, Inger Miller. It was just a different atmosphere, a different group. And you get the chance to recognize professionalism. You get to understand that this is a dog eat dog world. And the one thing about running professional track and field that's very different than many other sports is because there's no salary cap, there's no ceiling, but there's no floor either.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go and make a lot of money, but you could also be broke on the other end of that spectrum. And so being out there and seeing people, and that was my first time outside of football, seeing track athletes who had money. And then you're like, hey, you know what? There's something out here. There's an opportunity. I want to be a part of that. And I think Emmanuel was also a really good business manager. And he did some things early on, like we would have a retreat every single year, and he would bring in financial advisors to just really help us to understand and prepare for track, but also life after track. So I always respect him and appreciate him for that. Yeah. And so then now even fast forward, and I know we haven't even talked about this, but to see like this past summer when Bryce made his first, U.S. championship meet. And so he's at the U.S. championships and he's running, and then to see him get a chance to meet Emmanuel, and then the relationship that he has with Otto Bolden and to talk to him. And so the same people that I kind of grew up around and I grew up with, so to speak, right. Larry Wade, I've known Larry since, he and I were like 15 years old before we even went to A&M together. And so Larry is like an uncle to Bryce. And so to be able to have all of these connections with people that I ran with, trained with, to see Quincy transition from professional track athlete to now director of track and field at USC, and then to see him talking to Bryce, to see Joanna, who I knew because Joanna was training at UCLA when I was running with John at UCLA, that to see these people embrace my child, it's just, again, it's just, it's a testament to the overall experience that I had when I was with HSI.
That's right. That's a great point. And it's hard to see when you're a 22, 23, 24-year-old doing this, but those relationships you were forming they were valuable then, but boy, they got a lot more valuable as we became
Yes,
34 and 44-year-olds and have
absolutely.
children, etc. So what a great head on your shoulders. And, you described mom and dad, so I can't see you being the opposite of this, but, you could have been in there and went in cocky and, yeah, first in, first out, whatever. I'm here to take your spot, maybe, all this stuff. And it's like, oh, and Quincy sees that and goes, man, that guy's a jerk. I'm not going to recruit his kid. You know what that guy was when we ran? He
Yeah.
was,
Yes.
so just
Yes.
to know what you do today absolutely will affect tomorrow and
Absolutely.
the next day. So that's really
Absolutely.
cool. Let's move forward here a little bit. Let's get into some coaching. So, you go through a professional career, you have a great degree from Texas A&M, you go into the workforce. Where does coaching begin for you? This was great to have athletics. We're not really an athletics podcast. We're into coaching. So let's learn more about Coach McCray.
Okay. So I can tell you without a doubt that coaching was an afterthought for me. I never even thought about coaching.
Not at all. There
Especially
was no. You're among some greats here now with John Smith and Ted Nelson, and obviously great high school and summer coaches. There was no like, oh man, that's cool what they do. Maybe I want to be that one day. Not at all.
never. If I'm, because this is the podcast where we're certainly being honest and candid. When I left track, I had a very bad taste in my mouth regarding track and field.
Sure.
When in 2000 in the Olympic trials, there were people who beat me in the open quarter who were later found out to be having tested positive.
Yeah.
Right. So that experience of having my career also being impacted by people who were on performance enhancing drugs literally had me walk away. And it was like a decade long time period. I didn't even watch a track meet, didn't watch a track meet, didn't go to a track meet, nothing. And when my son first started playing sports, and again, we talk about God's timing and God's plan, I had a plan and a vision for my son, none of which even included sports.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
None of which included sports. I wanted him to speak multiple languages. I wanted him to be able to play a musical instrument. I thought about Bryce being an international businessman. So I was trying to think about how do we prepare him to go that direction? Actually, ironically enough, it was his mother who first introduced him to sports and playing YMCA soccer. And so then the YMCA soccer turned into flag football. And then one of the coaches that played flag football asked me to help be the assistant coach for the flag football team. Cool. So spend some time with my son. I'll do that. And then that kind of manifested into moving to flag football to then my son wanting to play tackle football. And at the time when my son wanted to play tackle football, this was kind of the beginning of the awareness around CTE and how we needed to train kids differently to play football. And there were so many youth coaches that I've always felt like, how do they even get to coach a football team? They don't know anything about football, not continuing their education around football. And with the fear of head trauma being there, I wanted to make sure that I had some kind of control over that. So I then created my own youth football organization to have my own team. And at that point in time, some of my old college teammates were now either college coaches, NFL coaches. So I could go back to them and say, okay, I haven't been around this game in a long time. How are you teaching these kids how to tackle now? What kind of offenses are you running? What kind of defenses are you running? So then bringing that back to in essence, a third grade football program that kind of grew 5th grade, 6th grade through junior high. We did that. And then my son wanted to play basketball. So we got him connected with his AAU basketball program. And then it wasn't too long before someone said, hey, coach, can you help us out? And I hadn't coached basketball ever, but now I'm sitting on the bench as an assistant coach for his AAU basketball club. Then we get to junior high. And I always laugh because Bryce, I tell people, Bryce was actually cut from his junior high track team in 7th grade. And
wow,
had so many kids, they used to also have what's called a D squad, a developmental squad. That's all he could run because their practices would literally consist of time trials. So you had to compete every week to be able to run in the track meet. So that was a 7th grade year. So then now he gets ready to go into 8th grade. and he wants to run track. And now his 8th grade year is different. And this is, again, we talk about coaches and our appreciation for our coaches. Right? I think about Coach Burton, his 8th grade coach who literally introduced him to the hurdles. And so it wasn't me. It was a junior high coach who saw something and an opportunity in him that, with me being a sprinter, I would have been trying to force a square peg into a round hole over and over and over again to try to make him be what I was familiar with. But this coach saw something in him, tried a different avenue. He loved the different avenue. And at that point, I'm like, I know absolutely nothing about hurdles, because when I was growing up, what they did was they would take all the kids who couldn't run fast and they put them over in the hurdles. So now it was trying to research and find. And with trying to help him with hurdling, that's when he got connected with a club coach. And that's when he became, and notice the distinction now I'm using between club versus summer. All right. So he joins club, Greater Houston Track Club. Great group of men. And at that point in time, I'd already coached Bryce football, coached Bryce basketball. He's now 8th grade. The last thing I want to do is coach him for track. And I still have my 7-on-7 team going on. So it was kind of like, hey, I'll drop you off to track practice. These are my days off. And I'm going to be coaching the football 7-on-7 team that Bryce was also competing on at the same time. And the Greater Houston Track Club coaches would always ask me, hey, can you coach? Can you coach? Can you coach? Oh, no, you guys got it. You don't need me. I am very content with dropping him off. I'm very content with sitting in the stands cheering for him. And then one thing happened to his division coach at the time, and he needed to step away for some family matters. And they were toward the end of the season now. And the coaches circled back around, CJ Singleton and Keith Stubblefield, the 2 owners of Greater Houston Track Club, asked me to help out. And I was like, nah, you guys got it. I'm very good. You guys can finish him out for the rest of the season. Bryce turns around to me and he says, Dad, you always told me that when God puts you in a position to help other people, you need to help them. And I stopped in my tracks like, oh, man, you got me. You got me. All right. I see how you played this. You got me.
Bryce, dude.
Yep, you got me. And so they were going to club championships that year, and they needed me to fill in. So I filled in. They kind of gave me the autonomy. Said, these are your group of kids. You do what you think is best. We're not even going to get in the way. And I remember having a discussion with them, and they thought that the kids I had at the time had a greater potential to win the 4x1. I looked at them and said, I think this is a better 4x4. They turn around and say, hey, we told you, this is your group. You do what you want to do with these kids. So we go down to Orlando for the AU Club Championships at the time. And for the 13-14 division, they win the club national championships in the 4x4. And that was kind of the birth of the coaching bug for me at that point in time. I had so much fun. Watching Bryce compete actually reignited my love for track and field again. Because I can honestly say, had Bryce not started running track, I guarantee I would have never watched another track meet, would have attended one. But because Bryce is competing, he was enjoying it. It literally reignited my passion and my love. And then it was, all right, well, now, if I'm going to do this, I'm outdated in track. Just like I was outdated in football, I'm outdated in track. Now let me start picking the phone and calling the college coaches that I know. Because now at this point in time, a lot of the guys that I competed with, they're now coaching, right? And I still had people from the professional network. At this time, Leroy, who I met when I was in 9th grade, Leroy's coaching. He's the head coach at U of H at the time, right? My last year competing professionally, Leroy was my coach. So now I'm like, okay, so if I'm going to do this, I need to start making some phone calls. I need to start trying to figure out, because the way that I learned certainly isn't going to be good enough for the way kids are learning and doing what they're doing right now. And then I ended up connecting with some other great high school coaches, because now I needed to understand beyond just simply the coaching techniques, X's and O's, as you would talk about. I needed to understand how to connect with a high school athlete. And, and shout out to Mike McKinney, Sammy Dabbs, and Clayton Brookins, because I remember watching Bryce in 9th grade, his first time running indoor, and he runs 53 seconds at an indoor meet. And I remember saying to him in the stands, oh man, I don't know about this for Bryce. Track might not be the sport for Bryce. I think he might need to stick with football. And them turning around and telling me, you're crazy. You're crazy. This kid's in 9th grade. Mm-hmm. And they reminded me at that point in time, my vision of a high school athlete was warped because I ran 47.10 in 9th grade. So if I ran 47.10 in 9th grade and I don't have any exposure to what's really out there in high school, 53 looks pedestrian to me. But because Clayton and Mike were also high school coaches, Dabbs at the time was working with high school athletes. They knew what the progression kind of looked like from 9th grade and beyond. And they were literally chastising me in the stands at the meet. And that made me take a step back and like, okay, these kids aren't bad. I just have a warped mentality of what's supposed to be good for high school. And so that was really good for me to kind of level set and to have people to help me level set. Right.
That's really interesting. I'm actually on the waiting list for a new book. I can't remember the name of it now, but the premise of it is we in society, and maybe it's American society, I don't know, and maybe it's, I for sure can see this heavily in sports society and track society for sure, is we get real giddy and up for the 9th grader who sets the national record, or the 12th grader that sets the wins the AAU nationals, or the freshman who runs 47 point. And it does, I wonder how many 53-second quarter miler freshmen don't go on to become 45-second quarter milers one day because we're like, oh yeah, it's not your event. Last year we had a kid run 47 as a freshman, and you're 6 seconds off, bubs. Maybe we need to go look at the high jump or something. That we're so focused on early, not development, early stardom, and what really life is about, well, where did you end? You didn't start out as in sales and business and marketing as a genius as a freshman in college, but you went on to learn from experiences of the job, and look at the track athletes who have gone on to become, 970, 980 guys that were at some point, they were 11 flat people, by the way, actually even slower, and so it's just, I'm really excited. I wish I could remember the name of that book. I'm really excited about reading that.
Well, when you do, let me know.
I will. Absolutely. I'll send it to you after this, just so you know, it's out now. I'm a big library guy, so I wait for my library book to come in. So, again, Danny, you're really giving us I don't use this term lightly, but a real masterclass in humility. You were a top-notch football player. You were a top-notch track athlete. If you were to have come out when you eventually got back into track, and especially with your own son, for crying out loud, I mean, there's possessiveness over that, right? It's like, hey, that's Mike. I love these kids, but I love my son, right? No one would have blinked an eye if you'd have said, hey, you know what, guys, this is how you train a quarter miler, and you spout out how you were coached or what you learned from John Smith. Again, you had said things at John Smith. So, I mean, who would have argued with you? And yet you said, okay, well, it's been a while. Maybe things are different. Let me go find out. Like, that's humility. To call up a Leroy, to call up maybe a Q and be like, hey, so what should I be doing with these kids? And, maybe some of them were like, dude, you ran 45, like, do what you did, they didn't. I know them. They're really smart. They talked you through it. But that's a real, like, when I think about coaches and the coaches we've had here on the podcast, and the ones that have, they're all successful in their own right. When we talk about the ones that are winning championships, which that's not always the definition of success, but in this example, it is. They're the ones who ask questions, who stay curious, who stay, the more they know, the more questions they ask. I think of people like a Kaba Tolbert, a Bush Exnader, a Mouse Holloway, all three are podcast alums. And I think about the success they've had, amazing. And then I think about when I talk to them, they're always asking questions. They ask me, I haven't coached in 17 years. And they're like, hey, so Mike, when you did it, what'd you do? And it's like, well, first, I don't want to screw you up, so I'm not answering that question. But it's just always interesting to me. In fact, the book that I'm talking about that I wish I could remember, was Kaba Tolbert on Twitter saying, hey, I got this new book that every coach needs to read. I'm 60 pages in and it is unbelievable. Like, so he's still learning. I mean, Cave Tolbert's a genius,
He
and
is
he's
a
still
smart man.
learning. And I just love that humility of like, all right, I got to go. I know some stuff. I'm not starting from ground zero, but I also know that I don't know everything. So I need to go work it out. That's interesting.
There's some smart people. There's a lot of smart, successful people.
So
Got to tap into them.
how did you develop you and the staff? How did you develop Danny, and what compare and contrast his high school and summer club experiences versus yours? We talked about yours was very compartmentalized.
Mhm.
High school season was high school season, and then summer season was summer season. How was Danny's?
So Bryce is.
Did I say Danny?
It's
Yeah,
okay.
Bryce.
It's okay. So Bryce's was very different because it came in a different time period, right? He needed to learn how to hurdle. I couldn't help him. I didn't know how to coach hurdles, so I had to go find someone. And you're talking about Vince Anderson said it best once. He said there's probably less than 100 really solid hurdle coaches in this whole country, and we're talking about on all levels combined. That's how special that event was or is from a technical standpoint.
I was a hurdle coach, and Vince once told me I was 101st.
Now I know him well. Know that he didn't say that to you. But he is.
He would have made me think I was number one. That's how great of a motivator
Oh
he
yes,
is, man. He'd have made me
yes.
like, "You're the best hurdle coach in the world," and I'd have believed. I'm like, "Vince, you're right. That's he's
He's
amazing.
awesome.
Love him. Love him.
I
Love him."
have so many files still where this man just willingly gave me things while he was at A&M that helped me to even prepare Bryce. I didn't know what to look for. Now I had his charts. I had his projections. I could plug in times. I had the opportunity to meet Coach James Spivey, who's in high school. He's probably one of the most prominent hurdle coaches in the Houston area. His list track record of experiences and compliments are a mile long. 70 plus years old, doesn't get on social media, but all he has done is produce results. Had the opportunity to then take Bryce over to him when he was the summer before 8th and 9th grade, so he could start to go. And he had a philosophy at the time. He would not take football players. You had to quit football if you wanted to work with him because he wanted so much time with the hurdles.
That's old school right there. Yeah.
Yep. And he knew sometimes the conflict with football coaches. And he always felt like, I don't want to invest so much time in someone when this isn't going to be what's going to take them moving forward, when I could be invested that time with someone else. And then we had an agreement that he actually trusted me when I said, hey, I can manage him away from you. You just worry about coaching him. I'll take care of football. And Bryce was his first football athlete that he led into his program. And so then, again, we talk about relationships. Relationships are what allowed me to be able to still work with his high school football coach to help him to get out of certain things so that he could do track when it was track time. And I think there is, obviously there's a level of credibility that comes along with my past athletic performances that gives me the opportunity to talk to the high school football coach. Because I say, hey, I know what you're doing. I know what you're trying to do. I played it. I get it. High school track coach, I've done it. I played it. I get it. Hey, this is what he needs. This is how I like to manage it. And it was just a different opportunity for us to collaborate, because also he was in an event that we really didn't have someone to teach him how to do. And so I think that was a all year process for the hurdle coach. But then now he has his club team. And so now I'm coaching club track at this point. And now for the first time, he's introduced to an indoor track season. And that becomes always an interesting dynamic because he's leaving football in the fall. Now we're getting ready to run indoor track when the high school program is simultaneously getting ready for outdoor track, because we start so early in Texas in February that now we've got to get him ready to run in January, which means that I have to start training him a little bit during the football season. Now, fortunately, at the time he was playing sub-varsity football, so he'd have his games on Thursday. And then now Bryce and I with the track on Saturdays, and we do at least one track workout a week. Then he would be with Coach Spivey on Sundays for hurdles. So it took advantage of sub-varsity games being played on Thursday. We use the weekend for track. Now we go and get him ready for indoors. And at the time, I'm not doing any coaching during the school year. So once the indoor track season over with, just turn him back over to his high school program. And at the time, his high school coach was, a pretty good men's coach or boys coach, excuse me. And he ran track himself, so he kind of got it. And I felt like for the first time, I could leave Bryce in good hands. And it was actually his departure that made me coach more, because had I had that high school coach not left that program, I wouldn't even be coaching the way that I'm coaching now, because Bryce would have had a solid off-season program. He'd have been well taken care of. And if there's nothing for me to do, I can be on vacation, so to speak, during that time period. But when he left the program, with him left a track guy. And so one unique thing about his high school at the time, it was one of the rare high schools where the boys track team was not being led by a football coach. They had a singularly focused track coach for the boys program, which enabled them to be able to have an off-season program. And so then when he left, there created a void. And so then I had to fill that void for him. And then in the process of trying to fill the void for Bryce, I recognized how many other kids were missing solid off-season programs. And they weren't able to prepare for indoor, as many of their high school coaches, they might not have understood, training cycles to be able to bring a kid through a full year. They might not have understood the significance or the importance of indoor. It might be because we don't offer indoor as a high school sport in Texas. There becomes that natural divide between the club and the high school during that time period where the kid wants to run indoor track. And maybe because the high school coach doesn't have a vested interest in indoor track, now they're like, I don't want you to focus on this. Because we start track season so early in Texas in February, I don't want anything to happen to you during this month. Right. I want you ready to go in February. So Bryce's experience was a whole different dynamic because things had changed. And then now all of a sudden, if I think about this realistically, the kids that I work with, I probably have them 11 out of the 12 months of the year. So now that brought a different dynamic to how I think about my coaching, because I have to kind of have a plan for them in the fall. I got to have a plan for them in the indoor season. I also have to think through, how do I manage with their high school programs? So I got to think about this block of time, which is the high school track program. How do I partner with them the best way that I possibly can, but also giving them the respect of understanding it's your time? Because I was like that with Bryce. With all of his high school coaches, none of them will tell you I interfered with him. It was during the high school team, it was their program. I stepped out. The only supplemental work that Bryce got when he was at George Ranch High School was with Coach Spivey for the hurdles, because that was such a technical event. We all kind of agreed we're not going to get in the way with what Coach Spivey is doing. And because at the time, his high school head coach, he wasn't a hurdle guy. He understood the 300-meter hurdles just from a race structure standpoint. So he could take Bryce there, and we felt comfortable with that, but he wasn't a technical hurdles coach. They didn't have the 110 program. So Bryce had the technical aspect with an outside coach. And then when that coach actually left George Ranch, now we didn't even have anybody that could help him with either hurdles. But by that time, Bryce kind of understood what he needed to do, and then I could kind of step in where needed. And then by this time we had COVID, the COVID year 2020, when we came back 2021, right. The new high school coach allowed me to come up to the school on hurdle days. And I could sit in the stands, so I couldn't be a part of the practice, but I could sit in the stands, watch Bryce. Bryce would have a cell phone out at the track. I could record him coming through a rep. He would go back between the reps, call me from his cell phone. I'd coach him from the stands. I'd send him the video over, and he kind of look at the video in there. And that's how he kind of worked through his senior year. But it's always been a very different dynamic because things have changed now. You talk about how fast athletes are now. There's no way that you can be as fast as they are now without having a higher level of coaching, more consistent coaching over the course of the year. And that also leads to some of the potential rubs between the coaches and how they're trying to blend in programs and work with athletes.
And I want to spend our remaining time on that. But before I do, I want to talk to dad, Danny McCray, as
Okay.
Bryce, Bryce was one of the top hurdlers, top track athletes, recruiting wise. You went through a fairly extensive, and I know it's different from when you were recruited from when Bryce was recruiting, and you're coming through COVID as well, which, mucks it all up as well. How did you handle, as dad, Bryce being recruited? He's being recruited by the top of the top. Yeah. How did that?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you, I'm a dad of a almost 13-year-old, 13 when you're listening to this. And you have as a parent, this mixture of, I want to be involved. I need to be involved, but I also need them to make their own decisions. So
Yep.
I can't imagine right now, and my kid's only 13, so luckily I got a few years, but I can't imagine going through that process of a kid making a very important decision where they go to school. How did you guys navigate that?
First, I think, as I tell all the kids in our program, it is absolutely amazing to me that one of the most important decisions that you're ever going to make in your life is choosing which university you attend. And you're making that decision at 17, 18 years old.
Have you been listening to the podcast?
No, my plan was to go after to listen.
Because we talk about this. We don't talk, I haven't put it in the words, you just put it there in regards to the college selection, but I do think it is ludicrous that we ask 18-year-olds to pick a major that is supposed to be the rest of their life as 18-year-olds. Like,
Yep.
So the very same vein there. That's why I was like, wait a minute, we're on the same track on that one.
Well, absolutely. And one of the rules that I have, not only for Bryce and for all the kids that I coach, was one of the same rules that my dad gave me. Hey, you can ask me anything you want, but don't ask me where you should go to school. That's a decision that you got to make. I will walk Bryce and any other athlete through the pros and the cons. And I think one of the things that's kind of helped me along the way is the relationship that I have with so many college coaches, and the way that I know them, I know their programs. I can think about the pros and cons for most universities, and I can help the kids think through, what are you looking for? What's most important for you? And these were some of the things that I kind of had to work with Bryce, because we had a rule that said, hey, Bryce, there was a cutoff for the academic ranking of universities. Hey, they have to be in the top 70. And I said, because for him, Bryce was also, we laugh about this as father and son.
Are you talking about like the U.S. World News and Report?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, we're gonna have to talk about that, Danny. Keep going. We're gonna talk about that here in a second. Right. Go ahead.
So with Bryce, it was like, look, don't bring me a school that's not ranked in the top 70. I said, because I feel like you were U.S. #1 in high school coming out. All right. You've run fast enough to where you can get the best of both worlds. You don't have to make any concessions for what you're looking for academically, and you don't have to make any concessions for what you're looking for athletically. You've earned this. So for you, I want you to pick. I don't care what school, but don't have the drop off beyond this number. All right. Because for me, academics is so important, because I told him, and I'll tell every kid, you will wear dress shoes much longer than you ever wear track spikes. So we need to make sure that the decision going into this is built around that first. And so it was different and unique, because some schools, and despite me telling them, some schools spent more time recruiting me than recruiting Bryce. And I was telling them, Bryce is going to make his decision. You don't have to win me over, win him over. And then some schools, they cultivated the relationship with him. He was still trying to figure out what he wanted to do. COVID was so different, because his senior year, they weren't even having official visits.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did he even get to take official visits?
So unofficial, I guess I should say yes. Officially, no. There was no way that I was letting Bryce only have a virtual tour of a university and go there. So his senior year, I basically said, we're going to do this the same way we would had you been able to be fully recruited with official visits. You pick your 5 schools that you want to see. I'll take you there myself. So we'll go around, we'll see the facilities. And at the time, they couldn't have any interactions with us, the college coaches, which to me made it better, to be honest, because we didn't have to have all the bells and the whistles. We didn't, we got a chance.
You get to see reality.
Yep. Yeah. We got to see everything for what it was.
Yeah.
All I needed from them was, okay, where are these buildings? Can I get a map? Are there anything that you believe, or is there anything you believe we need to see while we're down here? You give me that stuff, I will go map it out myself. right? We got a chance to even watch some people from afar practice.
Hmm.
We couldn't get in the gates, but we could stand outside the gates and we could watch. So I wanted him to be able to make the most informed decision that he possibly could make.
I love that you did that. I was working with a dad who's, I'm trying to keep this as so you can't identify who I'm talking about here, who had an athlete, a child that was one of the top, like number one or number two in the nation, and went to a university, a great university, and was transferring. And that's when the dad called me up and was like, "Hey, we're looking at these schools. What do you know of these?" Just kind of advising on that side of things. And I guess I never realized the child never got to take physical trips
Yep.
either. And so all of this, and I was like, oh my gosh, how many kids chose a school based off of a YouTube video or a
Yep.
Facebook, a Zoom call? I was like, I never thought about that. And I wondered if in today's, the transfer portal gets this very, devil thing. And which I always remind people, like, we transferred before the transfer portal, right? Like this is not brand new here. It may be easier. And by the way, I'm a proponent of it. I know, and I know all my coaching friends are yelling at me right now. I shouldn't say all, because it's a very controversial topic, but I love that a kid, at the end of the day, they're still a student. So I think they should be able to go to school wherever they want, whenever they want, to
I
be
agree.
frank with you. But I also know how it affects my friends who are coaches, professional life as well, their jobs. So I do have a lot of empathy for that. But it just hit me when I was talking to this dad. It's like, oh my gosh, how many kids? That's what I was wondering with Bryce. I'm like, oh my gosh, did he have to pick his school based off of a Facebook video or what, whatever? Like, that's crazy. Think about when any of us went to go to school, anybody outside of COVID, you got to go see, you got to go talk to, you get to go explore. And this was like, you like our brochure? Come to school. That's crazy.
That's what it was
I
like.
love that you guys took it upon yourselves. Like, all right, well, we're going to go check out these campuses. And I wonder if it ain't better the way you're talking about it, of like, because, coaches, we have to recruit. And so we do the bells and whistles, and we know those bells and whistles are not necessarily there once you get on campus. Let's be real here. So I love this. Like, hey man, there ain't no bells and there ain't no red carpet here. This is the carpet of the school. We're going to go find out what reality looks like. I love that, man. Bravo to you and family for doing that. I do want to talk about something real quick.
Okay.
You brought up the top 70 U.S. News and World Report. So I'm the kind of guy, this is going to shock you, and you listeners, you're going to be shocked at this. I listen to a podcast and I automatically think I know everything about that topic. So, but I really bring these things up because I want you to explore them. Not only you, Danny, our guest, but well, do you have any more children?
No, sir.
All right, so you don't have to worry about this anymore. But you listening that do have children. So I'm a huge fan of, have you heard of Malcolm Gladwell?
No.
He's an author. He's actually a big time track guy. He was like a miler back in universities from Canada, Jamaican by descent, and then Canadian by living and education. Huge track fan, big like a track nerd. He's an author, and he's an amazing author. Wrote books like Blink, which is one of my favorites. Outliers, which is actually every one of his books is amazing. Blink, Outliers, Tipping Point was one of the first ones that really put him on the map. He's an amazing researcher, and then takes all that kind of research and is an amazing storyteller.
Okay.
Go through books, and now he has a podcast, which of course is escaping my brain for some. If you just in your podcast app search Malcolm Gladwell, it'll come up. Revisionist History, where he takes topics that are forgotten or misunderstood and brings them out, right? So he talked about the U.S. News and World Report and how this thing is actually concocted. And, he's got a lot of data scientist people behind him doing all this stuff, right? And the reason I was really interested in this is because one of the schools, actually podcast alum from Dillard University, was on the podcast. Track coach from there was on the podcast. And I'm getting old, Danny. That was episode like,
club.
Yeah, that was episode like 80. So, oh my gosh. His Twitter is like the track coach. Oh my gosh, I see him all the time. I'm so sorry. I know you're listening and you're so disappointed in me. If you want to know, look in the podcast app and search Dillard University, and that'll bring up his episode. But he's at Dillard University, and Malcolm used Dillard as the example. Dillard University, a small HBCU school down in the New Orleans area, is never going to be in the top 70, top 100 of the U.S. News World Report. And he showed, because of graduation rates and what the kids that actually go on, what jobs they do, and acceptance rates. And really, it's a lot about endowment. And you can imagine that Dillard has a less endowment than a Harvard. And where if they were, I think if I remember right, he took out endowment from the equation and maybe something else. I don't think it was student to teacher ratio. There was some other kind of like, is that really important to education? And Dillard would have been like, I'm probably exaggerating here because I'm acting like I know it all because I listen to one podcast, but I think Dillard would have been like a top 10 on the U.S. News and World Report.
Okay.
It was really amazing. I remember sending it to
I can see that. I can believe it.
I remember sending it to the track coach, and I was like,
school.
"You've got an amazing school there." But unfortunately, when I go to look at the U.S. News and Report, I go, maybe I shouldn't look at Dillard. And it's like, actually, you should absolutely look at a Dillard. So anyway, just an aside, because I always like to branch other people into it.
Dillard is a fantastic university. That was a great example.
So how did, and I don't want to, I don't like necessarily talking about people who aren't right in front of me, but I'll take some liberty to it since he's your son. Bryce ended up choosing Georgia, Carol Smith Gilbert. Boy, I'm not sure you could go wrong there. I love Carol, known her for a long time. She is committed to being a future guest. She's just super, super busy this summer, so I couldn't get her this year, but she'll be on the show, and is now transferred to Texas A&M. How did, as far as what you want, you could say, I don't want to talk about it all, and we'll move on. It's completely okay. How did the decision go into Athens and then deciding I'm going to follow dad's steps and become a 12th man? Is that how you say it? I don't know.
Yep, 12th man.
Is that what you say for A&M?
Bryce's journey was a little bit unique in that when he chose Georgia and signed with Georgia, he signed underneath the previous coaching staff. So, yeah.
Which is funny because that coaching staff is now right here. I'm in Champaign, Illinois. I shouldn't say the coaching staff, but Petros, the head coach, podcast alum, by the way. And I love Petros, by the way. So they're not only will I will never allow coaching bashing on this podcast anyway. So, but yes, love Petros, by the way. So I love Carol.
Petros was the head coach.
Yes.
And then Althea Thomas, so Coach AT,
another podcast alum. Love AT. Come on, yep.
And Bryce absolutely adored her. I remember during COVID, I could come downstairs and I could tell who he was on the phone with just because of how he was smiling and laughing. I knew you must have talked to Coach AT. She's amazing. How'd you know that? Because I could just tell, right? So then it was he signed, and then they had to transition.
That makes complete sense.
And so it was almost a re-recruitment, so to speak. Sure. And he took the only official visit he ever got to take was after that. They changed the rules, and he could actually go visit UGA. And so Carol brought him in with the other athletes that she was recruiting at the time. So that was our opportunity to meet her. Great coach, great woman. I always laugh. It's like Mama Carol. She's going to care about those kids. And 100%. I think for Bryce, it was a good opportunity for him to be there. It was a different opportunity. It was a different school. For him, he didn't understand the difference between big school, small school in terms of teams. When, for Bryce, his situation was so unique in that when he got there as a freshman, there were no other freshman sprinters and hurdlers. There were no other sophomore sprinters and hurdlers. It was literally Matt, Elijah, Caleb Kavanaugh, those group were juniors at that point in time. So when he went there, it wasn't the same that you would know, same experience that normally a group of freshmen have when they first come on. That also helped him to grow up a little bit, but it was also the dynamics and changes that he came off of COVID, where his last year and a half of high school was inside. And I think that there's also some emotional maturity that we missed on that group of kids because, he didn't have a prom, all these things that he missed out along the way. All right. He didn't have the typical homecoming dance and, the process of getting your car at this period of time. He's learning online where they're telling you, hey, you can turn your work in at 11:59. All right. But then you still turn your work in late. And there really isn't a whole bunch of consequences that follow you as well there. Right. So for him, there was just a lot of experiences that he had to then adjust to changing when he was in college. Yeah. And also there's also difference of styles and expectations. All right. And what you want from your athletes. And, when you're a director, you have the opportunity to build and create the team you want and the way you want it. and you need to fall in line. And I think there were just some things that Bryce will be the first one to tell you that there were mistakes that he made.
Mhm.
And I can tell you that Carol loves him. He
Yeah.
loves Carol. And I think for him, it just came to a point where he wanted to try something different.
Yeah.
All right. And then being able to come back home, go to A&M, go to school that had a little bit of a different emphasis on quarter hurdles,
Yeah.
a different team that's involved.
You know what I love about that? First of all, Niall Lagania at Dillard.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
and he's awesome. Like I said, he was one of the first 100 guests we've had here. So I love
I follow
Niall.
him online.
Yeah, exactly. He's great, man. I love him to death. You know what I love about that story is not necessarily the peak behind what an 17, 18, 19-year-old kid is going through, but what I really like about that is, on the outside, we've had George Williams on the podcast before, great coach from
Yep.
St. Augustine's, Olympic coach, and he is famous for, you've heard me say this many, many times on the podcast before, if you're not in the huddle, you don't know the play. And what that is, it's really a way to think about judgment and how you judge others. And so it's real easy, using Bryce as the example, because we have him right in front of us here with Dad, is to say, oh, yeah, there's another transfer portal kid, went to Georgia, didn't like the new coach, decided to leave, went back to Daddy's school. It's very easy to judge that. So now to actually hear the story, it's like, oh, man, this kid didn't even get a visit. And then when he got there, the team was different. Left, by the way, on good terms. Him and Coach Smith and Gilbert are great. Like that's why you don't judge people. That's exactly why you don't judge the situation. You weren't in the huddle. You don't know what in the world was going on. So I appreciate you sharing that.
I do want to say one thing about
please.
that. It's funny. People oftentimes assume, even when Bryce was being recruited the first time, and then when hitting the transfer portal, that it would be me steering him to A&M, when it was the exact opposite. Right? Bryce made these decisions all on his own. He had, to not go to A&M the first time and to choose Georgia over A&M. And then when he left, when people hit him up when he was in the transfer portal, I tried to get him. Hey, go look at these schools. Go take these visits. He made the decision because he'd done his homework. He's like, nah, this is kind of where I want to go. And so it's completely independent of me, and which makes this even more special to me to be able to, a side note, I was there a couple days ago this week when they updated the top 12 all-time leaderboard, and to see his name there. And he was only been in school for one semester. Bryce's journey was so different because his freshman year at Georgia, he got hurt. And then so he got hurt, ended up having a stress reaction in his hip. And you're like, man, a 19-year-old with a stress reaction in his hip, we don't want to have a stress fracture. So he didn't do anything this summer. So that's why he didn't get a chance to go to U20s. And he was the number one kid in the U.S. at the time, number 3 in the world for his age. And it hurt him not to be able to go to that meet. So he didn't practice in the summer, then didn't practice in the fall. He literally didn't get back on the track again and start working out until January 15th of this year. Oh. And so then fast forward, and then to see him PR and then run 49.70, become number 11 all time at A&M, to walk those halls on Wednesday, and to see my name, his name,
That's cool.
And we're there together, and to watch him at practice and see, man, you're like, man, this kid's actually pretty good. It's just a really good feeling. And it's but to know that these are his choices,
right.
But most importantly, to see him have the connection and the network of friends that are at A&M and how they hang out with each other. I'll go back to the beginning of the podcast when I told you about my experience at A&M. I'm literally seeing him experience these very same things that I got the opportunity to experience. He's having a blast. I've never seen him with a bigger smile on his face than he has now. I mean, he's an hour and a half, not even an hour, 15 minutes of the street, and he rarely even comes home because he's having so much fun there.
Well, I would have assumed if you were really that overbearing parent that was going to make your kid transfer back, he had gone to Houston, because that's much closer. And by the way, he's got Carl and Will and all those
That's
guys.
right.
I mean, it's not like
great people, great staff.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not like that's any, that's a great school to go to for track and field. So I took the parent oversight, because I'm like, yeah, I know you're, A&M, and I know A&M people stick together, but it's like, man, Houston would be closer. And by the way, then I could be at practice every day, and I could be seeing everything that was going on if I had made him go to Houston. So yeah, I took that out of the equation early on that. Hey, let's spend the rest of our time here, Danny. Let's talk about, give us kind of an oversight on what you're doing now, coaching, and then maybe more importantly, besides, because we know you're coaching in summer, or I should say club.
Yep.
I like to bust myths. I like to have, hard discussions, hard topics so that we can get things on the table and,
Yeah.
kind of move together as coaches. There is this, not myth. There is this, it's not, I like to stay away from big words in regard. I'm from Alabama. I like to stay away from big words. I like to stay away from like complete. So like a lot of, or the majority of, because there's no stats. We don't really know this. I typically think actually things that we're hearing and reading on social media are actually very small snippets of what's going on. I think it's the vast majority of things going on in the track coaching world are positive. But I do know we have these discussions about high school coach versus club coach. And in Texas, it is a little unique. You do have more of a club culture in Texas than you do in, say, Alabama or even here in Illinois. And we have a pretty good club culture here in Illinois. But in Texas, from pole vault clubs to full team track clubs, there's a much more of a culture there in Texas. How are you? What is your stance on high school coaching, high school kids when they're in track season versus, you talked about the early January, February, and then the late, after state meet, summer? What's your philosophy of your role throughout that season?
Okay, so it has evolved over time. As I've learned more and experienced more, my thoughts have changed. I recognize
that's a good sign.
Okay, so one of the interesting dynamics that I've seen, and let me just first make a disclaimer: whether it be private coach, club coach, high school coach, there are great ones, there are good ones, and there are bad ones on either side. And sometimes the problem is the good ones don't know they're good, and the bad ones don't know they're bad. And you're still impacting a child. You're still having a young athlete.
Sure.
And track is one of those sports where it's really interesting. Track is just one of those sports where everybody thinks they're all the same, right? So if we look at football, football is one of those sports where there's a natural hierarchy because there's wins and losses here. You don't see people saying, hey, like Gary Joseph is a very successful coach, high school, Katy, Texas, won a lot of state titles. You don't see people say, I'm just as good as him. All right. You won't see, I'm just as good as Nick Saban. I'm just as good as Bill Belichick. Sometimes a team sports, there's just a differentiation in level of skill. Where with track, everybody thinks they're the same for the most part. A lot of people, I'm going to say everyone, a lot of people think they're the same. There's not much difference between me and them. They just happen to have an athlete that has better clay. They're just getting the faster or the more talented kid. If you give me that same athlete, I can get those same results. And when you realize in track, that's not the case. There really are people who continuously drive results at a higher level than other people.
Absolutely.
And you should stay to say, hey, look, can I figure out what they're doing? Well, if you get high school and club coaches together, all right, you get some of those same dynamics. One of the things that I also felt like, much the funny thing I tell people, high school coaches are oftentimes very responsible for the club coaches feeling like they've got a lot of success because from a training standpoint, most of the high school coaches, as time has gone on, there was always this mindset that you want to do everything first and sprint last. Work on our speed development late. It used to be I still hear people say, oh man, we've been doing this, and this, and we still haven't been doing any speed work yet. Like that was like this big rite of passage to success. And so a lot of high school coaches would wait so long to even develop speed that all the gains that they were going to get with the athlete, they were just delaying them to the summertime. And the club coach in the summertime is going to get all the benefit of that late delayed speed work that you had.
So stay there. I know you got more, but I want to stay because I want to. That's interesting. Never thought about it like that because just recently, at least recently when we're recording, someone I won't out them on Twitter. I retweeted it, so you could go check that. But someone said there are a lot of high school coaches that are I'm kind of paraphrasing it, that are anti-summer club coaches, that are anti-summer club coaching that are still taking credit for all the work that we do. Meaning, as a club coach, I have made these athletes great, and then you're going to go win the conference or regional or state title, and you're going to take all the credit and not give me any credit. You're kind of flipping that here a little bit and saying, yeah, some of that summer results that you're getting is because of the way that maybe I don't agree with are coaching during track. And so they're actually delaying it. So you get the benefits. That's super interesting to me.
Because it happens, right? And then there's different levels of high school coaches, right? And some run quality programs and some not so much. And the same thing happens on the outside. And so I think the dynamic that happens is that now you have a lot of people going back and forth. And track is just one of those sports, quite frankly, if you get a kid, especially a high school kid, boy or girl, they're growing, they're developing, their bodies are still changing. If you just have them do something, they're going to get better. And so as a result, if there's improvement, who's to say that improvement is bad? So the coach that's driving that in high school, even if they have an unorthodox training philosophy, by definition, their system was successful. And the same thing could apply to the outside coach. And then it's only when you invest in more knowledge that you begin to figure out why an athlete might change, all right, why they might improve. I think sometimes, and not to pick on my high school colleagues, but I've always felt like if high school track coaches invested in coaching education at the same rate in which high school football coaches invest in their coaching education, our sport would be vastly improved. Because in football, you cannot advance without coaching education.
All right. So I'm going to defend my high school coaches by what you just said there. So I go to a ton, and if I'm not there, certainly one of our teammates are there to, all the large, I'll say, high school coaching clinics. So the Wisconsin Track and Field Coaching Clinic, the Texas Track and Field Coaching Clinic, the Summer Texas High School Coaching Association, things like that. And trust me, I am seeing it's a vast majority of those are high school coaches and not club. This is not me saying you're wrong and it's actually club coaches. And on top of that, I have a ton of empathy for my high school coaches because they're coaching high school during the spring. Typically, let's say, the vast majority, for sure, I can say vast majority here, are only coaching during whatever the season. There's not preseason and all that kind of stuff. There is some places, but the vast majority is March, April, May is high school coaching. They're also to your point, to your coach is the calculus, the math teacher. Maybe they're married, they have a family. They also have outside passions, charities, churches, etc. So I have a lot of empathy for the coach who says, I am doing the best I can. I'm not spending an extra 5 hours a week every week to learn more about how to coach sprinters or hurdlers or stuff. I've got a 2-year-old that I'm trying to get through, diaper, whatever, all the life. And I know you as a club coach, and every club coach is listening right now, you also have life. I have a ton of empathy for you for that as well. So I don't know about I think more high school coaches should do more coaching education because I see them doing a ton. I taught level 1 for years, lots of high school coaches.
Okay. So I'm glad this gives me opportunity to expand on that because I don't want my high school colleagues to think that I believe that none of them are working and learning.
They will get the pitchforks. Right? They will come for you.
Yeah, I don't want that. I just want everybody here. I don't want that smoke. I don't want that smoke. But here's what I had to throw back at you. You've seen a lot of coaches, a lot of these clinics. Think about in the state of Texas, how many high schools do you think between 1A to 6A have track and field programs?
I'd imagine the most.
Right? So now we're looking at minimum 1,000 high schools. Let's just start there. Let's say we know there's 1,000 high schools.
Easy, yeah.
Right? So if you multiply that number by the number of coaches that are on each staff, that number is not reflected in most of these coaching clinics that we see. There should be an abundance of coaching clinics if we're looking at this by saying how many people are attending programs.
I'm with you. And what I think might be a little bit of, I'm going to call it harshness. You're not being harsh, but I'm going to use that word. Right. Texas is, remember, we all are in our own box, right?
Correct.
Some of us, and I think you're one of these people, work very hard to think outside of our box, but we are still in boxes. Texas is extremely unique for track and field coaches. And I think it's because of the size. So, we go to the Wisconsin track clinic. There are 1,000 plus coaches at that clinic. It's Wisconsin. It's small. It's not even the size of DFW, right? What's another one? Ohio, a little bit bigger populous state, but certainly not populous like a Texas. And there's 1,000 high school coaches there. And I remember when I first got into Gill and I went to the first Texas track and field coaches clinic, and there was 100. And I was thinking like, oh my God, it's Texas. To your point, what you're saying, I was like, oh, there's going to be a billion. There's a billion schools there. I think the size of Texas hinders the high school coaching association. You've got Lubbock way out there and then nothing else. You've got the DFW area. You got Houston, which is that's got to be what, 6-ish hours, 5-ish hours between Dallas and Houston. I've done the 35 enough that I kind of knew that it's just, I think it's hard to get Houston people to come up to Dallas for a clinic and vice versa. And poor Lubbock is just, they're just out there. They never get to come to clinic. I think the size of Texas, which has a lot of advantages, actually is a disadvantage to getting them all at a clinic. So I'm with you on that. Yeah. I just think you are seeing just Texas.
Absolutely. And let me make that as a disclaimer.
Yeah.
My experience is my experience.
Yeah.
When I'm looking just in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
Right. And because remember, Texas is such a football heavy state.
Correct.
And because I know so many football coaches and I listen to them and how much they had to spend when they go to college campuses to get education. There's all, because they have to understand schemes, what's going to be the evolution. So they are always pushing to get that advantage.
Agreed.
I don't see that. I haven't seen that in track. I think there should be clinics everywhere.
We
have the opportunity to get online. So now
I agree. We also don't have the culture, because I love your point about the high school coach who goes to the football coaching staff or even other high school coaching staffs to learn the schematics, things like that. I've heard of high school coaches doing that, but it's like the unicorn. We don't have that culture, which is odd, because I feel like almost any high school coach could call up almost any other college or high school coach, track and field here, and they would talk to him. I've met I almost said a vast majority. I've certainly not met the vast majority of coaches in this country. It's my goal. But every track coach I've ever met, 99.9% of them are like, oh man, I'd talk to Danny any day, or hey, I called up Mouse and he answered. Like, so, but we don't have that culture in track and field coaching. I agree, and wish we did.
Especially here in Texas, we don't. And so that kind of brings me back to your question earlier. So where I am and where I have evolved to, and going back to something you said about being empathetic, right? The high school coach has so I'm going to give this as a perfect example. I remember I was frustrated because when the George Ranch coach left, Bryce didn't have an off-season program. And I was a little bit bothered by the lack of the off-season program. And I want to give, again, head coach Clayton Brookins, head coach of Duncanville Boys Track. He says to me, he goes, all right, Danny, so you want the track coach, who now is the girls track coach, who you want her to run the off-season program. He's like, she teaches. She's the head cross-country coach. So she's already at practice in the morning for the kids who have cross-country. And then he asked me, he said, does she have children? I said, yes, she has children. He goes, so now she's married, has children, has to teach, do homework, be in the morning and cross country. Where do you expect her to put together this off-season program for your son? And I was like, light bulb. Okay, got it. All right. I'm not going to put that responsibility on her. I'll do it.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to coach in the off-season. And then where I kind of grew with that, as I tell my high school athletes, during the high school season, I am a track and field tutor. I am not your coach. I said, in the same way
during the high school season,
you
consider yourself more as a tutor.
Correct.
Explain more about that. That's interesting. I've never heard that before. Tell me more about that.
So when I was going back and forth, I couldn't really understand why it was so hard to partner with so many different coaches. And and just being empathetic to them. If I'm a high school coach, I got 60 kids on a team. They could be from a number of different private coaches, club coaches. I can't sit there and talk to 60 different private and club coaches if I'm the high school coach. And then vice versa, if I'm the club coach, I may have 30 athletes. I can't go always back and work tightly with 30 different coaches and spend the time on the phone. So how do we kind of come up with How do we kind of come up with a system that can kind of work and coincide with each other? And so I try my best to really put a foundational plan together in the off season to carry them through. Then I know I'm going to take them through indoor track. But then now the indoor track is ended. I am no longer your track coach. I'm just your track tutor.
Hmm.
So no different than if I were a student in a math class, whether I was advanced or struggling, I could go get tutoring to help either accelerate me or catch me up. And the math teacher would never be upset because the student decided to get some tutoring. So then I would wonder, why would the high school track coach get upset? Right? It's the same concept. So what I had to also recognize is that being a tutor means the tutor is supplementing what the teacher is doing at school. The tutor is not trying to recreate the lesson plans, not trying to recreate and say, okay, we're going to do this way, even though your math teacher school said do it this way.
Right.
The tutor isn't trying to take over for the math teacher. The tutor is there to help the student recognize, okay, if you're struggling with this, let me help you with this. If you don't understand how to do that, let me help you do that. And so when we get to the high school track season, I know that they're already getting some work done at their school. But I'm also cognizant that if you're the high school coach, even as well-intentioned as you possibly are, numbers and time often preclude you from the level of detail that an athlete may need in specific areas. So then that's where I come in, I feel like, and I said, okay, well then now if I have an athlete and you are a short sprinter and you are having technical challenges with your acceleration pattern. Well, they may be at school doing the bulk of the running. So you don't have to come to me to get the additional running. You're coming to me, we're going to work on this very specific thing that you need to get better at for your race. Maybe it's something technical from a running mechanic standpoint. This is an opportunity for us to work on your running mechanics, because I can't expect the high school coach to have the eyes for everybody that's out there, because oftentimes they're understaffed as well. So that's why I look at myself during the high school season and saying I'm a track and field tutor. Now, there may be programs that I've got, I typically try to keep no more than 18 kids in my program at any point in time, because I just feel like I like to have a smaller coach to athlete ratio. So we can have, and I'm not a systems coach, I am an individual coach. So I try to figure out what this person needs, how they train differently. You can always do that with smaller numbers. So being able to then work with these kids that may not be able to get something at their school to supplement them while they are in their high school season without trying to then step on the toes of the high school coach is probably the best scenario that I can think of.
I've heard this argument so many times and in so many different ways, and yet I have never heard it explained like that. This tutor principle, if you will. And when you for a guy who was not very good at math and still not, for you to use the math example, it's like, oh, I get it. The tutor, in today's, get told you have two kids, so we're doing all this Common Core math stuff, which is not how us old folks learn how to do it.
Yep.
And as the parents, and let's be real here, my wife, it's not me. As my wife is helping our children through it, she doesn't go, well, hey, I know your teacher wants you to figure out this math problem this way, but let me just show you the easier way, the way I did it. No, she goes, okay, you're having a hard time understanding the way teacher's doing this. Oh, okay, I see. Teacher's doing blah, blah, blah. She supplement that. Is that, do you think that is repeatable around the country? And it takes a mind shift though, right? I mean,
Yes.
it takes some ego dropping, the bad ego.
Yep.
It takes some communication, but that idea of a tutor during the tracks. Now, the reverse is either true, or the reverse is when you go to summer, it's like, hey, high school coach, enjoy your summer because now we're under my program. That's just an interesting mindset. How did you said you've evolved. How did you evolve into this tutor mindset?
Okay, great question. I think it has to go back to my core passion. If I think about why I do what I do, the most thing that I take pride and excitement in. It's the percentage and number of kids in our program who go on to sign athletic track scholarships. If it weren't for that, I promise I would not be doing this. All right. We've had in our program, we've had over 11 national champions. We've had multiple US #1 overall high school kids, state champions. So from an award standpoint, we've done that. But what I'm also proud to say is that over the last 6 years, 100% of the seniors who came from our program all went on to get college scholarships. And even looking at active NCAA rosters, even going through the attrition of kids going to school and might not make it, we literally, from our training group right now, have 25 kids on active NCAA rosters this year. We have 8 seniors. 7 of the 8 already have offers to go to school. So by this time next year, you know, we have 1 athlete that's in their last year. We have 1 athlete that most likely will turn pro at the end of this year. And so that by the time the 2024 kids go to school next year, we'll literally have over 30 kids on active NCAA rosters. That to me is this is what we do and why we do this. But I also had to recognize that my passion may not necessarily be the same passion for that high school coach. Their responsibility is not to get kids to college. They are paid to run that high school track program.
Hey, we got to be careful. You and I could talk for another 2 hours. I'm not cutting you off like we're stopping now, because I'm assuming you're watching your clock because we're over our time.
Nope,
I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah, okay. But you are delving into topics that, and you know, this isn't a free show in regards to like the guests to just say whatever they want. You've seen me, and I have even today. I'll challenge someone because what you just said right there, we're not going to talk about because I want you to keep going. But when you said, you know, high school coaches' #1 priority is not necessarily to get them to college. Oh my, go to Twitter and I will show you people that say if that's not your #1 priority, you are a disgrace to the coaching profession. I agree with you, by the way, because I also agree. You know, when I hear you saying those stats, and those are amazing stats. This many kids getting scholarships, and this many getting offers, and this many still on a roster. That's amazing because what you're doing. This is the positive impact that a coach makes. You are helping change young kids' lives. I love your quote of "You will wear dress shoes much longer in life than you will wear track spikes." Is spot on. Enjoy your time at track, and God bless if you get to go to the professional level. That's bonus time because we're all done typically after high school or college. Enjoy it because you're using that, you're leveraging track to get your education so you can go on and make a career. But what I know my high school coaches are going to say, it's like, well, yeah, Danny, you have 18 kids. I've got 100 on my roster. Of course, I don't have 100% going on to do track. By the way, I've got kids that are on track on my track team because they wanted the cool uniform, or their best friend was running, and that's okay. This is the most inclusive sport in the world, and that's what makes it one of the greatest sports in the world. So we might have to one day do a part 2, by the way. But I actually have an idea when we get off recording. Make sure we talk about it real quick. But keep going with in how you evolved into this tutor, because that's the real important part I want to capture here.
So that was the catalyst to the evolution. I at one point in time was that same outside coach that thought if going to college is not your #1 priority as the high school coach, shame on you.
That used to be
was that guy. I was that guy. And then I had to take a step back to think about all the things that you just described. They have a team. And there's a wide assortment of talent variation amongst that team.
Right.
Every kid has needs. They're all different, right? And so I stopped putting that burden and the onus of responsibility on the high school coach. And yes, I know the high school coach, they want what's best for the athletes. They are happy and ecstatic when a kid goes and he signs a scholarship. They want that, but they don't necessarily have the time. Some might not have the skills. They may not have the capacity to support a number of different reasons that could stand in the way of that. That's what helped me to recognize, hey, I'm really a track and field tutor. This is what I like to do. So the kids who come to my program are kids that come to my program who have aspirations of running track in college. So then now that becomes my part of my job. I can help them improve their skills, refine their skill set to make them more competitive. I can help them to understand what's going to be expected in order to get a college scholarship. I can utilize my network to be able to help place people, get people attention. So that's when I say the tutor, I am literally here to supplement the high school coach during that high school season.
How does a summer coach is listening right now and you're tugging at their hearts? I'll remind people that I don't know, this might be my first definitive. Every coach, certainly the vast majority of coaches, will lead with, I do it for the kids.
Right.
When I talk about, hey, you need to make more money. Yeah, we don't do it for the money. I do it for the kids. And that's great. That's awesome. Although I do think you should be making more money because you need to raise families and charities and passions, etc. But we'll say, I do it for the kids, but then we'll say, I want the credit.
Okay.
And I'm not getting the credit. And you know what? That's not good. So somewhere right now, there's a coach listening to you, a club coach, summer coach, and they're like, man, I think Danny's right. Maybe I can make a bigger impact here if I thought about this tutoring during the high school season. How does you've been through this evolution now, and you continue to evolve, continue to refine. How does someone start that journey? That's a big question. You may not have actually thought about it, because this is different. It's one thing to internalize it and externalize it by your actions. But now I'm asking you to think about other coaches that might want to start that journey. It doesn't happen overnight. This didn't happen overnight. What's 1, 2, 3 things? Posture, maybe it's reading, maybe there's a book, maybe there's a coach. I have no idea. But for you, what would you recommend? Someone's like, maybe I need to explore this. What would you suggest?
So I try not to speak in absolute. So here's going to be my first absolute for today as well. When you said that coaches will say, I do it for the kids, I will say you are all 100% right. You're all doing it for the kids. The difference is, what are you trying to do for the kids? That may vary. And so when you first come in, you kind of walk in, you should say, we're all doing this for the kid. So we're not adversaries here. We just have to look at
you're talking about club coach and high school coach.
High school, private.
We are not adversaries.
We're not adversaries.
Love it.
We're just trying to think about what direction. So because my passion was helping kids get to college, that was the lens I looked through things. Well, if you're the coach at a high school, that might not be your passion. That passion for helping that kid might be, the kid needed some social constructs. The kid needed to be able to interact with other people. There are so many different reasons why you're doing it for the kids. But let's just start there. We're doing it for the kids. We are not adversaries, right? And then we have to remember, equity is not equality. We make the mistake of thinking that all kids have the same needs and everybody needs to be treated the same. No, that's not. Every kid has something different that they need. Every kid has something different that they're working on. All right. And so I think that's kind of the first step you got to take. Then I think from the outside, you have to be able to invest in yourself from a coaching knowledge standpoint. I think one of the things that has helped me in the relationship that I have with high school coaches, it's, like it or not, I'm going to get a little bit of credibility just because of what I've done in the past, my own athletic experiences. That helps me to cultivate relationships and conversation with coaches that maybe some other private coaches wouldn't get, right? They're not going to make the assumption, say, well, he knows what he's doing. Because at the end of the day, a high school coach, this is their team. They want their team to be successful. The last thing that they want is someone who is interfering with their team's success. And quite frankly, if you have someone that might not be as skilled, now there's detriment to the athlete. And so so there's a trust that goes involved in that. One of the things I think that's also where the outside coach can make things easier for the high school coach. It's I'll shout out to Ahmad Roper, Summer Creek girls high school coach, told me something about 3 years ago. He goes, Dan, you got to remember, you guys have been working with these athletes before we ever get them. So they're coming into high school already having forged relationships with you guys. So then now their parents second guess us, the athlete second guess us. And so Coach Mike McKinney, a high school coach, would remind me, say, look, you don't want to tear down a high school program. So I would always be very mindful not to comment and critique on training methods, training styles. Just because their system might be different from mine doesn't mean that it's not good, right? Because if you plant that seed into an athlete or their parent, you end up doing more harm than good, right? So my goal is to try to help the athlete have a better relationship with the high school coach, because then they can talk, whether the high school coach wants to talk to me or not. If they have a good relationship with the high school athlete, the athlete can then convey what they need, what they're trying to work on, how they're trying to do these things, so that the high school coach doesn't feel like I got to deal with 50 outside coaches. I only got to deal with the athlete that I have in front of my face right now. Yeah. Right. And so I think those are two steps that I would tell people to take instantly. Then the third is to continue to work with your own education within your craft. You know, it doesn't take long before two people having a conversation can realize either the person I'm talking to knows their stuff or they don't. And that doesn't mean we have to always agree on philosophy. We don't have to agree on philosophy for me to know, hey, this person has put some time into this. Hey, for what they believe in, they're prepared for. And if that's the case, all we're trying to figure out is how can we both, at best, just kind of coincide and work with each other. That, I think, is a step that you can take. And then, of course, even trying to take what I do professionally. So I manage and coach people professionally in my day job. And I remember an AVP one time told me, probably about 6 years ago, he just made a comment in passing one day. He said, imagine the work that can get accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit. And I try to take that into this role. And it's like, hey, no one has to know that I coach you. You wear the high school uniform, you go run fast. The only thing that matters to me is that you perform well and that you're opening the doors for you to go to college, because this is our passion. And so you can have, we're not diametrically opposed to each other inside and outside. We're all doing it for the kids in a different way. We just have to figure out what that way is. And we cannot on either side. I'm not a big fan of the command and control style of leadership. And I think sometimes if you're a coach on either side, if your method is command and control, I think that there's going to be more harm than positives that are done.
You see the irony. Was it your dad?
Yeah.
In the command and control business.
That's right.
And I don't mean that negatively. Right. I'm just saying, like, that's just,
and that's why I said it. That's why I said it, because he would also tell me that the difference between when he was in the military, he said, I had to lead troops in the battle. He said, he's like, you know, Daniel, and he said, I don't want to call him a government name. Daniel, listen, when you go to war, we don't have time to keep thinking about the different ways to do things, because there are literally lives on the line.
Great point.
So I don't look at sports that same way, right? I look at sports like I look at my professional work environment. It should be a collaborative effort. You know, we got to be talking and figuring these things out, because you can learn from everyone. Yeah. I think about the most growth I've had this year in 2020, I guess the 2024 season, so this all-season program, the most growth I actually had came from a parent of one of my athletes who happens to be studying a lot on his own. He reads things because he's invested in his daughter's development. And then we would talk about different things, and he would challenge me on different things. He would challenge me. I'd go back, talk to other people, read, research, and I'm bringing new things back to my program this year based on what someone who didn't run track themselves. They were not a track coach. They were just things that they found, that they researched, and they brought back to me. So I think you can always learn when it's collaborative. You can learn from anyone. And as long as you're trying to figure out how can I learn, then the program gets better. We collaborate. The high school program, I think most high school coaches, they want to do a good job. They 100%. Want to do well. Absolutely. So when they see that, you know, we've had some success that very proud of, they may stop and ask, well, how do you do it with this kid? And I think with our program, what I've learned over the years, even most recently, there's a wide range of kids in our program in terms of their high school situation. Like I've got some kids where they don't even have to train at their high school at all. They can just train exclusively 100% with me. There are some schools, I got some programs that are like, hey, let's think about the different days of the week. These days, they can come with you. These days, they're with us. Then there's another group of coaches where it's, no, we want to be 100% hands-on, and we don't want to make any concessions for anything that they might have to do after school. That's just not what we do. So I have kids from all that spectrum. And so what it's taught me over the years is, okay, well, how do I manage this relationship? How do I manage this relationship? How do I manage this relationship? All while knowing that these kids are at the practice. If you're the kid that's the program that's hands-on and they're not achieving the success, and they're looking at the kids who have complete autonomy from their program and they're achieving success, they're looking at these kids and like, why can't I have this? And their parents are asking, why can't we do this? Can we get our kid over to that school? And so then I have to manage that because I know that they eventually have to go back to their high school. And I don't want them carrying these type of thoughts and sentiments and attitudes back to the high school because I know it's not going to end well. Right. So these are literally things that over the years allow me to evolve to kind of where I am right now.
It's amazing. We started today's podcast talking about how the level of track and field on all levels, high school, college, and pros has just, it's like we took 10 years a leap in the last 2 to 3 years. It's quite amazing. I just think about where there is tension between a club coach and a high school coach. Like how much better could the kids be if we could just, you and I are of an era where we know what this quote comes from. We could all just get along. If we could work
That's right.
collaboratively and together. Wow. Like we may actually be holding back the level of track and field. Like what could it actually be today? To end today here, Danny, I love that quote you had from the VP where, imagine what could happen if, we did work and we didn't worry about who got the credit. One of the quotes or saying slogans that I really like is success is not pie, and what that means is
I read your
did you see that the other day? Yeah.
Yep.
If a high school coach is having success, that does not take away from you, summer coach, and vice versa. If summer coach has success, that does not take away. It's not pie. It's not if I get a bigger slice, well, that leaves a smaller slice for Danny to have success. It's infinite. We can all have success. And I think to my point about maybe we're actually holding track athletes back, specifically in the high school side, because that's where the high school club, summer club coaching is occurring, is maybe that pie is a lot bigger if we could just work together. Yeah, if we could just work together.
But there's also there's also a different dynamic. I'll say this that I didn't mention. What also makes things difficult is if you're a private coach, sometimes I don't do private coaching for a living. I have a primary day job. But if this is your primary day job as a private coach, this is how you make your living. You need volume. You need volume. You need bodies in your program. Right. So then to justify the cost and to get the volumes, because this is how you make your living, there are a lot of times it's going to put you in direct conflict with the high school coach. Because I can have kids in my program and say, oh, you did this day at school? Man, don't even come. Hey, stay where you're at. All right. Or, hey, you know what? You do this at school. We can do some technique here. I have kids in my program that literally drive over an hour one way every time they come to practice. And so if there are things I can give them to stay at home and don't have to get on the road and have 2 hours round trip, I would prefer for you to do that. Right. So I want to find this, but I also recognize this isn't what I do for a living, so I don't need volume. I can make it with 18 kids because I just want to have a small group. And I think there's just so many different things that are different today that did not exist when you and I were coming out of high school, that makes this whole dynamic very different. Because if you're an outside coach that does this professionally, you might look at the high school coach and say, you're messing with my money
Right.
because I need the kids in my program to perform well, because that's going to attract more kids to my program. Attract more kids to my program, I make more money to feed my family.
Yeah, great points. I think this all goes back to my man George Williams. If you're not in the huddle, you don't know the play. I did not think about that aspect with the full-time personal coach. What we tend to think that the high school coach has it easier. And then the high school coach thinks, oh man, the college coach has it easier. And inside of college, we think, oh man, the NCAA guys and gals have it easier. And then we think, oh man, the Division I coaches, they got it so easy. And then we cut it down to, oh, the Power 5 coaches, they have it so much easier. And even inside the Power 5, by the way, there is a distinct division there. And we think, oh gosh, Florida, A&M, you got it so easy. And in reality is we all have our struggles. We all have our thing. Even Florida, they're winning all the titles, and Mouse is amazing. The staff that he has there is absolutely fantastic. And they're in Gainesville, and it's Florida, and it's sunny. I promise you, there are things that a Mouse is like, oh man, you know what? I can't get a kid in if they don't have maybe this academics, or if they don't do this, or they do that. He's got struggles. I guarantee you all do. If we would just we go back to that E word, empathy. Let's all work towards, because again, I'll remind you, I think every one of us would say, I do it for the kids. Well, if that's true, then you'd set aside your ego, you'd set aside another dollar, which I know you need, in specific situations. You'd all set it aside and say, okay, then what does it really mean? I'm doing it for the kids.
Absolutely.
Danny, man, it started off by talking about Flava Flav, and here we are talking about the private coach's financial statements here. Danny, thank you so much, man. It's quite humbling, specifically for a guest like you, Danny. I invite you onto the show, and I already block off 2 hours of your time, so you're already kind of like, oh man, what's 2 hours? That seems like a long time. And here we are at the 2 hour, 20-minute mark here. And you have no real idea, well, what's Mike going to ask me? What's Mike going to do?
None.
And yeah, there's no kind of behind the curtains here. No one gets pre-questions, by the way. There's no like a list of
I was actually thinking, I was like, where are the pre-questions?
Yeah, we don't do that, man.
We're bringing it. Make me nervous.
We do real life here. When you meet someone, you don't get scripted questions. You say, what's on the top of your mind? And so, first of all, I'm so grateful for you, for your trust, for me and for Gill, joining us here without having any preconceived knowledge of what's going on here. So thank you for that. Very grateful for your time. You're extremely busy. I understand that. So, anytime you can give me 2+ hours of your time, that means an absolute ton to me. Time is extremely valuable. So thankful for that. And then for you being a track coach, I mean, it's literally my whole world. I mean, when I think about what you do as a track coach and other coaches out there on all levels, high school, club, professional, collegiate, I honestly, when I think about what a coach means to me today, I think of my wife and my kids and my home and things like that. None of that happens without what you do. It doesn't. It doesn't.
Thank you.
So I'm so grateful for you. You could be doing a lot of things, and you do a lot of things, but you choose to be a track coach. And that is the positive impact you make on young people, man.
Thank you.
It's amazing. So I'm just so grateful for you, and so grateful for you teaching us things. I mean, these are things that I like having these discussions, because I think it's important for the coaching body to hear. And so I'm just so grateful to, let me push back on you and let me challenge you some. I'm really grateful for really authentic conversation, man. That's how we move the profession of coaching forward in a positive manner. So Danny, thank you so much, man, for being here today.
And I'll tell you, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to be on. When I think about what you do, and just the people that you've had on these podcasts, that's humbling to even think that I will be amongst the company of some of these people, these great coaches, these great people. So to be thought of as worthy enough to be a part of that group means a lot to me. I greatly appreciate it. And I hope that our conversation today helps just one other coach that's out there learn more, be more inspired, think about their reason, their why for doing it for the kids. And hopefully, a young athlete who might be trying a different event might hear it and see what my path may be. A father and son coaching staff, or duo rather, see how that dynamic is. Transition to college, a high school and an outside coach, collaborating more effectively. A lot of these things, if one person has helped, it is worth the time. And again, I appreciate you allowing me to join the podcast today. Thank you to Gill Athletics. Thank you to you as well. It's been a fantastic afternoon for me, and I can't think of a better way to enjoy a Friday afternoon.
Oh, man. Thank you, man. That humbles me. I appreciate you. And you humble me by being here. You know, again, it's hard to say the words out loud that it's season 5. I don't know when we first started recording these in the trust, because no one was doing podcasts back then. So the trust from people back then, I'm just so humbled and amazed that we're in season 5. You've already seen the guests we've had here so far in season 5. Trust me, we're just going to continue rolling and bringing you amazing people that choose to be track coaches because you deserve it. You deserve to hear their stories. Awesome. You deserve to learn from them. So thank you for being here this week. Join us next week as we continue our mission of uplifting and honoring coaches from around the world. See you, everybody.
Love it. Bye.